Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Good morning and welcome to all. I'd like to call this meeting of the California Veterinary Medical Board to order. To get started, I would like to request our executive officer to conduct the roll call.
Before I do roll call, just really quickly, there is one board member participating in this meeting remotely. The board member participating remotely must disclose whether there are any individuals 18 years of age or older present in the room at the room location with the board member and general nature of members' relationship with any such individuals. Dr. Bradbury, is there anyone 18 years of age or older present in the room with you at your remote location?
No.
All right. Dr. Bradbury, you're reminded that participating remotely, that you must have your camera on and visibly appear on camera during the open portion of the meeting. If you experience any trouble with visibility appearing on camera, the member shall announce the reason for your non-appearance when you turn your camera off, such as due to challenges with internet connectivity.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And I'll go to call roll. Ms. Pulowski,
Here.
Dr. Bradbury,
Here.
Mr. Espinoza,
Here.
Dr. Grant,
Here.
Dr. Maniak,
Here.
Dr. Solocito.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Before we move into our agenda, the board would like to begin with a land acknowledgement as a formal recognition of the indigenous people whose ancestral lands we gather on today. We respectfully acknowledge the Nisinan, Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, and Patwin Wintun peoples, as well as Sacramento's only federally recognized tribe, the Wilton Rancheria. These communities have stewarded this land for generations and continue to contribute to its cultural and social fabric. This acknowledgement reflects the board's ongoing commitment to fostering respectful relationships and collaboration with tribal nations on matters of mutual interest and concern. Now we will move on to agenda item 2, public comment on items not on the agenda. Before we open the floor for public comments on matters not listed on today's agenda, I'd like to remind participants that comments should not include discussion of pending complaints, licensing applications, or disciplinary actions that may come before the board in the future. Please note that this public comment period is intended to provide information to the board members. It is not a forum for dialogue between the public and the board. By law, board members may not engage in discussion or act on any issue raised during this time, except to decide whether to place the item on a future meeting agenda. We appreciate your cooperation and welcome your input. At this time, I would like to invite any members of the public who are present in the room to come forward with comments on items not on the agenda.
Yes, Bonnie Lutz. I just have one comment. I've received a lot of questions recently about whether or not scanning for a microchip should be part of the physical exam. And there seems to be a lot of misinformation. I'm concerned about it because of the possibility for disclosing confidential information if the person who's scanning and gets the information goes a little bit too far with, trying to make sure that the animal gets to the right owner. So that's really my concern, and that's what I've been advising people to be careful of, that, basically they can scan if they want to, but they have to be careful about confidential information. But I had told Southern California VMA that I would bring that issue up during this time. Thank you.
Okay, there are no other comments in person. I will now ask the moderator to open the line for any public comments from those participating remotely.
For everyone participating via WebEx, now is the time to raise your hand. You can do so by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. And for our mobile device users, you have 3 different screens and only one of them has a hand button. So you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the dot dot dot, and cycle through the 3 different pages in order to find your hand. Once again, this is for public comments for items not on the agenda. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no additional requests, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. All right, moving on to agenda number 3, the review and approval of the January 15 and 16, 2025 board meeting minutes. Does anybody on the board have any comments?
Ms. Pulaski submitted some minor comments that we have incorporated in edits. Justin, if you wouldn't mind sharing a screen and we can go through the edits that Ms. Pulaski had submitted.
Would you like me to go through the pages?
If you don't mind, yeah.
So, okay. On page 8, upcoming president's training, line 2, we just added an S to vice president. On page 8.
1 second, we're in the,
Oh,
we
yeah.
have the wrong document open.
And then Dr. Bradbury has her hand too.
I know.
And then page 10, under training and veterinarian requests, we swapped local and get, so that it's get local. And it's CAV mark, not CVR, it's CAVMRC. And then on page 16, under CE credit category, the Karen Atlas comment, it was changed licenses to licensees. Page 22 for under suggestions and recommendations. For GVR's comment, 2 lines above Juliana, it's instead of saying soused, we're saying sussed. Sussed out. Page 23, under utilizing existing law, 5th line, removed B before enforceable. Page 27, CVMA, under the CVMA title, no formal position. 5th line, CMVA should be CVMA. Page 28, purpose of investigations. This one was a little bit more difficult to, I listened to this one and Matt and I worked on this one. It was repeated and so not in the discussion, but it was generated by a complaint, generally misconceptions by public. So we generally initiated by a complaint and want to correct misconceptions by the public is how we corrected that. Page 33, evolution of animal care tasks, line 3, live should be life. And page 35, supervision information, first line, Dr. Miller has 2 L's. Page 38, encourages board support, the Karen Atlas comment, second to last line, standings should be stands. And page 41, Karen Atlas, second paragraph, 6th line from the end of her statement. Bills AB 8814, it was in 2023, not 2013. And that was all I had. And I see Dr. Bradbury.
All right, Dr. Bradbury?
All right. So I I am always grateful for Ms. Pulowski's attention to detail. I only have two others. On page 9, kind of middle of the page, tracking how the virus spreads. The last sentence states the virus also spreads in the urine. I listened to this, and the more accurate statement would be the virus has also been detected, because I don't know that it's been proven that it's actually spread in the urine. And then on page 41, let's see here, under Karen Atlas's comments, see, it's the second to the last paragraph in the, or rather, second to last sentence in the last paragraph. It says, she said it is nice and ensuring. I think she said assuring, not ensuring.
I listened to that one actually several times, and she does say ensuring.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then
no, I was right there with you because ensuring does not sound correct, and I was with you.
no worries. That was it. That's it for me.
I listened to that one several times, and I went back and forth, and I'm like, that does not make sense. But she said ensuring, so
Great. That's it.
And then Justin, going back to one of the items that Ms. Pulaski had pointed out, it had AB 8814, it should be AB 814. So if you do a search, a control F for 8814. If right there, see where it says AB 8814? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments from any board member? None. So do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
Dr. Bradbury, is that motion as revised today?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess now we would like to invite members of the public who are in the room, if you have any comments with regards to the minutes. I see nobody would be coming up to make a comment. So moderator, could you please open up the line for any public comments from those participating online?
Absolutely. WebEx is open for public comment on the motion before us. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. And for our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ... in order to find your hand. And it looks like our first request is coming from Karen Atlas. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a 15-second warning before your time expires.
Hi, this is Karen Atlas. I just wanted to chime in about the approval of the board minutes. I think it's, I know there was some discussion about whether it should be assuring or ensuring, and whether what I said at that very moment. I think it's clear, I hope it's clear, that we are just trying to assure that these are done, these decisions are made with the facts here and helping the consumers. So I think that we can just assure us that we are using some nomenclature that this board continues to understand, or hopefully understands. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was our only request via WebEx.
And call for roll. To take the vote?
Okay, so now I guess we would take a vote.
Okay. Ms. Pulowski,
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza,
Yes.
Mr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Maniac,
Yes.
Dr. Solcito.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, so moving on to agenda number 4 would be the report and update from the Department of Consumer Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Have to make sure to adjust the microphone. Well, hello and good morning. My name is Matthew Wainwright. I'm from the California Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for the opportunity to join you all today, both in person and remotely. I'm here to discuss 2 items. First, the governor's reorganization plan, and second, the hybrid telework transition. So first, onto the governor's reorganization plan. In January, Governor Newsom released his proposed 2025-2026 state budget, which included a proposal to split our current Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency into 2 state agencies, the California Housing and Homelessness Agency and the Business and Consumer Services Agency. The proposed California Housing and Homelessness Agency, acronym CHHA, will oversee housing and homelessness solutions and safeguard civil rights. The new Business and Consumer Services Agency will be responsible for consumer affairs, licensing, and enforcement. The Department of Consumer Affairs would be among the 8 entities in this new agency. As part of the process in state government, on April 4th, 2025, the governor's reorganization plan was delivered to the nonpartisan Little Hoover Commission for review. The submission of the plan to the commission began an approximate 90-day formal process. In the coming weeks, the commission will conduct public hearings for interested parties to provide input on the proposed reorganization. The dates for these hearings will be announced soon. After the hearings, and within 30 days of the plan being submitted to the commission will write a report that we'll submit to the governor and the legislature. The commission's report will offer a recommendation to the governor and the legislature as to whether it believes the reorganization plan should go into effect. The commission sometimes offers recommendations for how the plan could be strengthened, either through administrative actions or subsequent legislation. The legislature will then have 60 days to review and consider the reorganization plan. The governor's plan becomes effective on the 61st day after it has been given to the legislature, unless either the Senate or the Assembly adopts by majority vote a resolution to reject the plan. If approved, the Business and Consumer Services Agency will be created on July 2025 with 1 year of transition and will become operative on July 1st, 2026. In addition to several virtual briefings hosted by Secretary Moss, there is detailed information available on the reorganization plan website at www.bcsh.ca.gov/about/reorganization. We believe this is an extraordinary opportunity for the department to better align with other consumer protection entities. With a dedicated consumer protection focused secretary within the governor's cabinet, this is an exciting opportunity that will only strengthen our mission, momentum, and delivery of services to California. DCA will continue to keep board and bureau leadership updated on the progress of the governor's reorganization plan. Now, on to our second item, the hybrid telework transition. On March 3rd, 2025, Governor Newsom issued an executive order requiring all state agencies and departments to update their hybrid telework policies for employees and increase from 2 to 4 days in office per week beginning on July 1st, 2025. On March 13th, 2025, the California Department of Human Resources issued guidance on implementation of the executive order. The guidance provides defined parameters for when agencies and departments can make case-by-case exceptions to the 4-day in-office minimum requirement. DCA has been working closely with a few programs on identifying additional space needed for this transition. DCA has been working hard responding to questions and will continue to keep leadership updated on any additional direction received from CalHR. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm happy to do my best to answer any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any question for Mr. Wainwright?
Hi, thank you for coming. I have one quick question.
Sure.
What perceived change to how our board functions will there be both in the interim while this plan is being put in place for the next 60 days and then afterwards?
This is regarding the governor's reorganization plan.
Yes.
So I don't have any information beyond what was provided to me on that at this time. To give a little bit of context of where I am within the organization chart for the Department of Consumer Affairs, I'm a legislative manager within the Division of Legislative Affairs. I'm covering this update, sort of pinch hitting for Board and Bureau Relations. So I don't have any information on that beyond what was provided to me here, but I'm happy to pass your question along to BBR and see if we can get an answer to you to board staff.
I can also take a stab at it. As far as the reorganization plan, there's no change to board operations. We're going to continue operating as usual.
Great, thank you.
There you go.
Anybody else?
I just have a question.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Dr. Bradbury.
So previously agency, which was the housing, I always forget the acronym for it, but we always called it agency, oversaw DCA. So it sounds like that's going to be split off. So who would DCA be reporting to, or who would oversee DCA then?
Yes, so the proposed new agency would be the Business and Consumer Services Agency.
Okay, so that's just like an overarching agency, and then DCA would be under the umbrella of that.
Yes, as I understand it, it would be one of 8 entities within that new agency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we would like to ask if there's any public comments with regards to the DCA updates in the room. I see nobody's stepping up. Moderator, can we open it up online for people who are participating remotely?
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx on the DCA update. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. And for our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Mr. Wainwright.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 4. Number 5, the review, discussion, and possible action on the MDC report by our chair of the MDC, Ms. Marie Assery.
Good morning. Let's open. Okay, so I'll start with an overview of the meeting we had yesterday. It was called to order at 10 o'clock a.m. and a quorum was established. There was one public comment from Bonnie Lutz. It was the same public comment that was made this morning. Minor amendments were made to the minutes from the January 14th meeting, which were approved as amended. I'm going to skip over items 4, 5, 6, and 7 from the MDC agenda, as we're going to discuss those in greater detail momentarily. Agenda item 8 was the inspection subcommittee report. This included an update on the mobile inspection application launched in November 2024. Since its launch, the app has significantly streamlined the inspection process for all parties involved. They also discussed the updating of the hospital standards self-evaluation checklist, which is strategic plan objective 3.7. Since the January meeting, the subcommittee has met several times to review and revise the checklist. The overall structure is being revised to align the objectives with current law, and hyperlinks to the applicable code sections are being added for each objective. Objectives that are not supported by current law are being removed. In addition, third-party resources such as inspection information from the California Department of Public Health and Radiologic Health Branch are being linked throughout the document. Compliance examples are also being revised to address frequent areas of noncompliance. Compliance examples are being removed whenever the objectives are self-explanatory. They anticipate a draft being ready by the July 2025 MDC meeting. Throughout the review, the subcommittee identified multiple statutes and regulations that should be created, amended, or repealed. This includes clarifying existing laws, closing potential loopholes in federal regulations, and removing redundant or otherwise unnecessary regulations. The subcommittee will draft potential legislative and regulatory proposals for MDC and board consideration at future meetings based on these findings. Agenda item 9 was the update from the outreach subcommittee. They have continued their focus on spectrum of care, talked to UC Davis professors, and read an article from AAVSB on the topic. The subcommittee emphasized how vital good medical records are and the importance of documenting recommendations that the client declines. The subcommittee has also been discussing unlicensed practice. They've been reviewing outreach materials supplied by a reproductive services veterinarian geared towards educated consumers, mostly breeders, at dog shows. They're also reworking these materials for consumers who may not be as familiar with these topics. Item 10 was the CDFA subcommittee report. They met last Friday. The blood bank regulations that were recently approved go into effect this July. CDFA appreciated the board's help in getting the word out to veterinarians. Highly pathogenic avian influenza is still overwhelming multiple departments at CDFA, so we did not receive an in-depth update at that meeting. However, it was mentioned that the strategy for managing HPAI in dairies varies based on the area of the state where the dairy is. HPAI is now affecting most dairies in the state except for a few coastal and northern regions. Before I move on to the other items, does anybody have any questions on those? Okay, agenda item 5B is the recommendation on legislative proposal to amend Business and Professions Code sections 4825.1 and 4827 regarding veterinary medicine practice exemptions. A little background on that. The Unlicensed Practice Subcommittee was, among other things, tasked with pursuing legislation to narrow the scope of licensure exemptions under section 4827 to prevent unintended consequences. Specific concerns were raised with the owner exemption in 4827A1, which is being applied far beyond its intended purpose of allowing ranchers to provide veterinary services on their food production animals. The board receives many complaints about rescue groups where individuals associated with the groups are accused of unlicensed practice resulting in harm to animals. However, since rescue groups are considered the owners of these animals, these complaints are closed. Many of these complaints are forwarded to the district attorney offices for consideration of animal cruelty charges, but most do not lead to any criminal charges. Additionally, many unlicensed individuals in the equine and small animal communities claim their services were performed gratuitously, thus exempting them from the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act. Animal owners often defend these individuals due to long-standing relationships and cheaper services, making it difficult for the board to prove the services weren't provided for free. As detailed in previous meetings, the subcommittee updated the MDC and the board on stakeholder discussions with the equine community in October 2024 and with small animal stakeholders in January 2025. Like the equine community, small animal stakeholders raised concerns about unlicensed practices, particularly in dentistry and reproductive services, which was discussed in the outreach subcommittee report. In response to these concerns, the subcommittee proposed legislation to amend section 4827 to narrow the owner exemption to one's own livestock or food animals, add provisions to preserve animal owners and caretakers exemption from the act when administering medications to their own animals, and update the livestock definition in section 4825.1 subdivision E to replace equines with any animal in individual training or any animal that competes as an individual. After receiving public comment and MDC discussion, the MDC decided further work was needed before approving the proposal to move forward to the board. The MDC directed the subcommittee to meet with CDFA to discuss the potential impact of including or excluding livestock in the owner exemption and to keep the changes related to animal owners and caretakers administering medications to their own animals. After hearing the MDC chair's summary during the January meeting, the board decided to keep the current definition of livestock and requested the MDC to continue working through the raised concerns. On March 10th, 2025, the subcommittee and board staff met with representatives from the California food animal community. This included 4 veterinarians that work throughout the state. Stakeholders were briefed on the board's task of pursuing legislation to narrow the scope of licensure exemptions, specifically the owner exemption. They were informed of concerns raised by the animal shelter community and the efforts made by the board to include language addressing these issues while still protecting consumers and animals. The subcommittee wanted to ensure that the language change from animal to livestock or food animals would not undermine the exemption's original purpose. Stakeholders appreciated the outreach for feedback and did not express any opposition to the proposed language. During the meeting, stakeholders provided examples of unlicensed activity affecting the food animal community, including widespread unlicensed reproductive services and pregnancy diagnosis, the fact that veterinarians are hesitant to file complaints due to fear of retaliation or conflict of interest. Consumers rarely report harm, especially in food animal and equine sectors. Individuals trained by veterinarians are then going out and starting their own reproductive businesses outside of working under the veterinarians. Difficulty recruiting and retaining food animal veterinarians continues to be an issue. Economic pressures are leading to reliance on unlicensed practitioners. And high-value animals and show circuits create another incentive for unlicensed practice, as that is quite a lucrative business. When asked about large-scale ranch horses qualifying as livestock, stakeholders insisted that equines should remain separate from the livestock exemption. They also expressed openness to the idea of creating a mid-level practitioner specializing in reproductive services due to the shortage of veterinarians available to provide these services, especially in remote rural areas. On March 10th, 2025, the subcommittee and board staff also met with Dr. Kate Hurley from the Center for Companion Animal Health at UC Davis. Dr. Hurley stated that rescue groups and responsible breeders should be included in the owner exemption as they manage large populations of animals, just like livestock producers, and must make real-time decisions for their care. She expressed concern that the proposed changes would adversely affect a rescue group's ability to support the mission of shelters and would lead to underground or informal methods that could reduce oversight, increase the risk to animal health, and negatively affect public health. Dr. Hurley raised 3 main concerns, the first being the current exemption. Shelters can administer medications, but rescue groups cannot. Rescue groups need similar flexibility since they handle large populations of animals under challenging conditions. The proposed solution was to extend shelter exemptions to include rescue groups. The legislative proposal would add a new definition for rescue group in section 4825.1 subdivision G. The proposed definition for rescue group was based on Food Animal Agriculture Code sections 30503.5 subdivision A2 and 31751.3 subdivision A2. This new rescue group term would be used in section 4827 subdivision A5 capital A and capital B, as well as the new continuing education legislative proposal, which was discussed and approved by the board at its January 2025 meeting. Notably, rescue groups would not be added to subdivision A5C because rescue groups are not registered veterinary premises and they do not have a supply of medications that otherwise would be tracked or dispensed pursuant to regulatory requirements. Her second concern was about liability. To extend the shelter exemptions to rescue groups as proposed above, written protocols would have to be established by California licensed veterinarians for shelter and rescue staff with proper training to follow. Concern was raised that few licensed veterinarians would be willing to assume liability for this responsibility. There was also concerns regarding funding to establish and maintain these protocols. The proposed solution was to allow rescue groups to follow protocols developed by either a California licensed veterinarian, a university program such as the UC Davis Shelter Medicine Program, or reputable shelter medicine text, which was further discussed later in the meeting. The CVMA or the board might also be involved in the development and implementation of these protocols. Notably, proper training has already been defined in section 4827, subdivision B1. Her third concern was infectious disease identification. Rescue groups often need to identify animals with infectious conditions, such as ringworm or leukemia virus, to promptly separate them from others to prevent the spread of disease and possibly start treatment. The subcommittee proposed solution or response to that was that they had concerns with extending exemptions for rescue groups beyond what shelters can currently do without a veterinarian. The subcommittee did not believe unlicensed individuals should be allowed to diagnose or treat commonly seen infections such as upper respiratory tract infections, diarrhea, or skin conditions. If rescue groups suspect any animals have those conditions, they can proactively separate them from other animals until they can be diagnosed and treated. Broader ethical and practical issues were discussed. It was acknowledged that many rescue groups start with the best of intentions, and the board strongly supports their efforts. However, the reality is that there are many examples of individuals associated with rescue groups going beyond their resources and abilities and crossing the line into hoarding situations and animal abuse. Guardrails need to be in place to prevent abuse or neglect under the guise of rescue. They also met that day with representatives from 3 polo clubs to address concerns about unlicensed activity occurring at polo events throughout California. These concerns included unlicensed individuals providing medical care to horses, out-of-state veterinarians practicing in California without a California veterinarian license, and foreign veterinarians, especially from Argentina, working on horses without California licenses. The specific concerns were that event organizers and managers were aware of this illegal activity, but were not acting to prevent it. Allegations include the mistreatment and misdiagnosis leading to patient harm, and reports have increased in frequency and severity. There were 3 polo club representatives present at the meeting. Their responses were as follows. One representative stated that she was not aware of unlicensed practice at her facility, and she would be open to requiring proof of a California license for any veterinarian providing services at the club. Another acknowledged hearing about unlicensed veterinarians at the club, but had not seen it himself. He said other veterinarians usually report such illegal activity. And the third representative stated for various reasons it would be challenging to report illegal activity, mostly due to the size of his facility. Challenges to enforcement were also discussed, including how rapidly the polo season occurs and the vast number of horses and participants who come and go during the season. They also noted the lack of proof of unlicensed activity occurring. Possible solutions were discussed, including requiring participants to provide the name and California license number of the veterinarian at registration. This could include a QR code for quick license verification. Developing formal policies that include language and liability waivers stating that only licensed veterinarians may treat horses and penalties for noncompliance could be imposed. Create a clear policy that management will report any known unlicensed practice to the board and encourage anonymous reporting by veterinarians and staff. Develop an informal document explaining legal requirements for veterinary practice and penalties for illegal practice to distribute to polo players and horse owners. Send state investigators to polo events to monitor for unlicensed practice. And engage with the United States Equestrian Federation and the International Federation for Equestrian Sports to create a national policy requiring proof of veterinary licenses at horse shows. The subcommittee intends to reach out to Steve Schumacher, who is the chief veterinarian at USEF, to explore this option. This meeting resulted in both immediate and long-term goals to address these concerns. The MDC and board received written public comment, which are attachments 2 and 3 related to the legislative proposal for board consideration. Updates were made to the legislative proposal to clarify language and incorporate public comment received during the MDC meeting. These changes are reflected in red text in the new proposal that was emailed yesterday following the MDC meeting. Up. So in the ledge proposal that you received in 4827 5A, we revised let's see here, the text for the protocols to be written by a California licensed veterinarian, an AVMA accredited university veterinary medicine program, or a state or national veterinary shelter medicine association. And that was based on public comment received. In B, the same change was made. And in C, or rescue group was struck, that was inadvertently added in there. And that was addressed earlier in the memo as to why a rescue group doesn't belong in C. Under 6, based on public comment, a sentence was added regarding the VCPR. so that it reads pursuant to a written treatment plan that includes the route and/or method of administration and dosage and/or frequency of use prepared by a licensed veterinarian with whom the owner has a veterinary client-patient relationship to treat the animal, administering the prescription drug or medication other than anesthesia to an animal by the owner of the animal, an employee of the owner, or a designated caretaker of the animal. This was to prevent unintended consequences of that portion. And those were all of the revisions that were made yesterday. Um, So if the board agrees with the legislative proposal, please entertain a motion to submit this to the California State Legislature. And do you guys have any questions?
All right, opening it for comments from the board members.
Do we need a motion to get the discussion underway, or?
You can have a discussion first before a motion.
I'd like to thank Maria for doing an excellent job of summarizing a very complex issue and trying to make it straightforward. I mean, it is a complex, and it's been through a lot of work effort by the subcommittee and the board and input from the stakeholders.
Thank you.
Just a little note, there's very little mention of racehorses, the racing community in this legislation, but I'd just like to clarify that I think that the California Horse Racing Board, in fact, covers a lot of what's going on here, and they are making sure to the best of their ability, and they have some enforcement to be able to stop the unlicensed practice of racehorses within enclosures, in case anybody in here or the public want to know why racehorses weren't included here. But that does not include the unlicensed running of races, which is another separate problem, a very serious problem too, actually.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. I think we have comment from Dr. Bradbury.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I really would like to just thank Dr. Nunez and Dr. Grant for all of the hard work and the numerous stakeholder meetings that that they participated in, and I feel like they were very receptive to various groups and their comments and thoughts. I am disappointed in the contentious nature of some of the letters that we received. I feel like we've gone really quite far in trying to address people's concerns, particularly the shelter community. And I just think it's unfortunate that it has to be so contentious and not collaborative. But with that, I feel like our members have really tried very hard to continue to be supportive of the shelter medicine community in our making different minimum standards and a variety of ways. And I just feel like we never do enough. So I'd like to just say we continue to try and support that community. So back to the legislative proposal, I just had a couple of questions. Some of these are not in anything new, but I did, since we are rewriting this or adding to it, I just wondered, so for page 7, 4825.1A, we have amphibians in some of these definitions and not in others. And I didn't know if we wanted to add amphibians, like includes fowl, fish, amphibians, and reptiles, wild or domestic. It's kind of a minor thing. On the, let's see here, trying to think, same page. F, livestock includes all animals, poultry, aquatic, and amphibian species. I wonder if that could be cleaned up and just say livestock includes all animal species that are kept raised, since poultry, aquatic animals, and amphibians are animals. That might just be more concise. And I apologize, I can't see what you're doing while I'm reading this, so just holler if you need me to stop or slow down or anything. Page 8, let's see here, 4827 A4. Similarly, I know this isn't part of the new wording, but when I read this, it seemed to me like someone who's an employee of a shelter could, in theory, euthanize a sick animal without the presence of a vet. It sounds like it doesn't even have to be at the shelter, and it doesn't have to be homeless or surrendered. So I don't know if I'm just overreading that or not, but that was sort of when I read it, it sounded like euthanasia of sick, injured, homeless, or surrendered. Those are all different categories in that sentence. And then without a presence of a veterinarian, when the person is an employee of an animal control shelter and its agencies or humane society and has received proper training. So it doesn't say they have to be at the shelter. It just basically is saying that someone who is an employee could administer sodium pentobarbital for euthanasia. Before I move on, I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. I
I
can't.
don't know if I'm just under reading it as well, but I just am assuming that when you're an employee, what you call this, you're executing a function under the, like within the shelter operation. So I just made an assumption that that's what it is, but I don't know if anybody else has other thoughts that this actually kind of gives permission for any employee to be able to engage in this activity outside of its employment.
I mean, and I am reading it that, I mean, it is, if they find a sick or injured animal on the road or something and they have to take care of it, I mean, I am reading it that way. But they've been given training and that's their function, that's their job. They have to do things like this. So,
When I read this, I think that somebody who is an employee, and again, these are like rare instances, or not even rare, it's a theoretical instance, but an employee of a shelter could potentially also work for a veterinarian that has, at-home euthanasia business, and then now they can send them out because they've been trained at a shelter, they're an employee, and it's a sick animal somewhere else. Anyway, we don't have to belabor that. I just read that and was like, oh, that doesn't sound like a tight definition of that. Let's see here. So we can just move on.
I
To
think Tara would like to.
Oh, sure.
So I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to insert some clarifying language that the person is providing those services in their capacity as an employee of an animal control shelter. They don't just have to check the box that they receive a paycheck from an animal control shelter and then can in their personal time, administer this euthanasia treatment. It would have to be in their, within their duties as an employee.
Yeah, that would be great. So you can see what I'm saying there, Tara.
Perhaps you could move on to talk about some of your other concerns, and I'll work on some text.
Sure. Okay, page 9. So uh this number 7, the underlined, I don't know, I just kind of put this here. I have when in one of the in both of the letters from stakeholders, there was some concern about owners not being able to provide first aid to their own animals, and I do agree that this, just in the way that all of this is worded, it seems to me that there is no allowance for the provision of first aid to your own animal. And maybe somebody can, who's familiar with, who's been working on this language, can kind of show me where in this document or where in the new language owners of animals would be allowed to provide first aid.
Maria. Yeah, this is Barry Grant. Dr. Nunez and I had talked informally about including a paragraph or statement in here that none of this prevents owners from performing standard animal husbandry and first aid procedures. But it was difficult to try to figure out where to include it. And I guess we're thinking that maybe it's just assumed that people can provide first aid to their own animals.
Yeah,
With no fear of penalty.
yeah, I think
So
that's,
if you,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you do want to include that somewhere, you would have to define what first aid means.
Well, I think that, the concerns that, since it isn't in here, the concerns are valid that, somebody providing first aid, I would be violating this. So, yeah, I wish that's a lot of adding to this whole
Right.
this whole legislative proposal, but this is, this is serious. This is changing the statute. So I certainly feel like that would be important. And I don't know how to do that in a board meeting without sending it back. And if we send it back, I guess it wouldn't be part of our sunset. Is that correct?
Yeah, the board doesn't meet again until July, and that's typically not, at that point, it's too late to put something into our sunset bill.
Well, I am concerned about the whole, just having an assumption in there. So because, it just is, uh, our intentions now are different, than the board in 10 years perhaps. So I don't know.
So it sounds like you'd like us to add a section 8 to allow, and Dr. Grant had said, animal husbandry and first aid. We would need, again, to define what does first aid mean.
Listening to Dr. Bradbury, I would say, I think that is a good idea because of, as we say, it seems like the shelter community has a lot of concerns, and I would have to say I also understand the concerns presented by the shelter community because of the challenges that they have in managing, like overpopulation and all the sick animals and so on and so forth. So I guess placing a simple clause defining what they're able to do, because that's what we're saying. It's basically assumed that any pet owner, any what you call this steward of an animal who sees something should be able to do first aid. But then that's an assumption from our end. Maybe it just needs to be spelled out. So I agree with Dr. Bradbury that maybe there is a need for us to include a clause that says, that pet owners or, shelters or rescue groups, as long as it is within the reasonable, scope of what first aid should include.
Yeah, I understand all of it and I don't disagree with it, but reasonable, then you're defining reasonable. And I know there's a legal definition. I'm looking at Mr. Espinoza.
where the lawyers
Yeah, but I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of the, I love the idea and I think it's great. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of we say something, but then it creates, now we have to create another definition and then we have to create another definition and we have to keep creating definitions. And that's where my concern comes in, because it's the list of things that we can do instead of, and then you always forget the one thing. You're going to create a list and then you're going to forget the one thing that, that's where I'm a little concerned of just, saying that they can do this. I would like to be very careful of what we say they can do, not narrowing the scope, but not also broadening it, if that makes sense.
But if we added here, number 8, providing, nothing in this prevents an owner from providing standard reasonable animal husbandry techniques, is included. I mean, we do practice in some legal situations where the practitioners are judged on what is standard of practice in that area, whether it be in the state or whatever, that this is what everybody else does, and it gives some legitimacy. I mean, if it came up that, everybody just cuts off a leg on an animal that gets, I think that's a little routine, but that wouldn't make sense if you were going to take somebody for animal cruelty. I think the reasonable person say that's not the right thing to do.
Mr. Espinosa?
Am I on? Can you hear me? Yeah, I just looked up the concept of first aid to see if that is defined anywhere in California law. And there's a definition of public safety first aid, which is defined as the recognition of an immediate care for injury or sudden illness, including medical emergencies, by public safety personnel prior to the availability of medical care by licensed or certified healthcare professionals. So in the regulations, there is at least an attempt thus far to define the concept of public safety first aid if we need to start with some type of working definition. Just pass that on for concern.
Any other comments?
So we could look at taking a stab at it. And Justin, if you don't mind adding a section 8. And this is just to get something out there for board members to look at. But if you add a section 8 and then providing, I'm trying to use your words, Dr. Grant, standard husbandry services and first aid to one's own animal. And then Justin, can you add first in front of aid?
Could we put that definition in parentheses behind first aid that Dr. or Mr. Espinoza?
So, yep. So now we're going to have to add a definition. Tara raised that we don't know what husbandry means either. So I think we're looking at adding 2 definitions. So Justin, if you could scroll down where B, where it has the definitions. Uh,
Subdivision B is for
Yep, sorry.
shelter
Yep.
services only. So we wouldn't want to insert another definition there. Most likely what we would do is we would have perhaps a subparagraph, capital A. So for purposes of this paragraph, standard husbandry services means, and then a new subparagraph B, first aid means. Or we could
We're putting it
do,
in 4825.1 where the definitions are, because we have rescue groups defined there, right?
yeah, but are we using first aid anywhere else in the Practice Act or standard husbandry services anywhere else in the Practice Act? It seems to me that this is a pretty limited use. We're just trying to establish some exemptions from the practice of veterinary medicine. And I do have some language to revise paragraph 4.
Let's get here first.
Mhm. So I'm not really sure what definitions are appropriate to add here.
So hold on. Cool. So the AI Google says, animal husbandry services encompass the comprehensive care and management of animals, including breeding, feeding, housing, health management, and overall well-being. That's pretty broad. What, I mean, to the profession, what does husbandry services mean to the profession?
Well, of course, my pre-vet training was a few years ago, but I don't think it's changed that much. I used to be able to get a degree, at least at Washington State University, in animal husbandry. And that was essentially accompanying all the different species, what was just mentioned about the care, feeding, castrating, breeding, bowling.
Yep, but now you're telling the owner they can do all that. They can castrate and they can do all that. Like, that's what he just said.
I don't think castration is part of animal, like,
Husbandry. It's just the general care, feeding and health. And I think that is what husbandry is.
I think it's the upkeep of the well-being of the animals. And with the first aid, I think it should encompass like basic like treatments to prevent suffering or the demise of the animal. Because that's all you do when you do first aid. You're not actually doing like intervention, but more of what it is that you could just, either to alleviate the suffering
That's
or to
first
prevent
aid,
death.
yeah, but what's
But
husbandry?
The
for?
husbandry is just the upkeep of the well-being of the animal, a healthy animal.
Well, then, if that's the case, I would make the argument that's not the practice of veterinary medicine and would not fall under the purview anyway. Because if they're
Mhm.
feeding them, take overall well-being, housing, health management, that's not the practice of veterinary medicine.
yeah, what if we just limit it to first aid?
Yeah, what if we just take out husbandry? Why do we have to have providing standard husbandry services?
We don't.
Well, what I'd like to say is that I think including a phrase like husbandry whatnot would take care of a lot of the concerns that we've had from the 2 rescue groups that no longer would a person be able to clean the eyes of a kitten or this and that.
But-
Because these are standard things that people should do.
But is that husbandry?
Yeah, it's taking care of your animal.
Yeah, I think that the reason that that whole idea was wanting to be put in there is the, you know, like combing a cat for fleas was one of the examples, which is, you know, I don't think anybody would construe as the practice of veterinary medicine, but it was listed as an example. You know, changing a diet because of diarrhea or something at home is, you know, considered, you know, they're concerned that would be considered practicing veterinary medicine because it's recognizing and diagnosing the problem of a gastrointestinal upset and then prescribing a plan of a diet, you know. So I think that it would, you know, alleviate that concern by keeping that in there. But I don't know. The first aid is the one to me, and I guess I think it's less than just. It's not just the you know, relief of suffering. It's also, you know, stopping bleeding and things like that. So it is, you know, it is some intervention that's other than just relieving suffering. So I think first aid needs to. I liked the definition that that Mr. Espinoza provided.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can we use that definition for first aid and then go back and define husbandry?
Well, and that was for public first aid. There's another one for animal first aid. It says, providing immediate care to an injured or sick domestic animal before professional veterinary care is available. Justin, Tara is putting language in the chat for you to copy and paste in the proposal. Justin, if you don't mind sharing the proposal, and then you'll start it with for the purposes of paragraph 8 of subdivision A. Well, I guess you're in the subsection. Purposes of this paragraph. Okay. Then she'll send you the language.
So this language that we have here, it would be effectively its own. This is the exemption, rendering animal first aid. And this description helps to establish what is first aid. So it's to preserve life, reduce pain and discomfort, and minimize the risk of permanent disability or disfigurement, to stabilize the animal and provide comfort until a licensed veterinarian can assess the animal.
So then Justin, you would strike where it says providing standard husbandry through A, and then you just start it at 8 at where Tara provided.
On some level, I think this would include standard animal husbandry, because it's minimizing, or it's reducing discomfort. So cleaning out ears and wiping eyes.
Sorry, Justin. So actually, where it says 8 and A, you're going to strike those 2 lines, and the exemption will start with the new 8. So you're going to strike 8 where it says providing standard husbandry services and first aid to one's own animal, and you're going to strike A for the purpose of this paragraph, and it's going to start with 8. There you go. And then delete the line providing. Thank you. What do the members think?
I mean, I'm good with that. I think that would allow people to remove a tick and things like that.
And change diet. Because that was a big one that, yeah.
So this no longer applies to one's own animal? This can be any animal. Is that okay?
I think it probably should be your own animal, but I guess, yeah, any animal. If I find something on the road, I might not be my animal.
Right. It could also be an animal that you're pet sitting or is at your home because your
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
family's out of town or at work. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, because the idea until a licensed veterinarian can assess the animal, I think is the idea behind this is that we really are protecting the consumer and the pet. And that's what this statement is about. And so I think it still manages to do all of that.
And this would not eliminate using telemetry or Zoom or whatnot for veterinarian to be able to take a look at a cow on the road with a broken leg, and just here's a picture of it, doc. What do you think? Sort of thing. I mean,
That's fine.
I just want to raise the question that doesn't this exception swallow the rule in that someone who is basically practicing veterinary medicine can just say, no, I'm not. I'm just rendering first aid because whatever the procedure I'm engaged in is reducing pain to the animal. And does that, I mean, does that raise a concern for?
I felt like the minimizing the risk of permanent disability or disfigurement was kind of the backstop on that. So, as previously reported by the board's executive officer, some of the complaints that have come in to the board involve individuals performing surgeries with the intent of helping the animal patient, but ending up disfiguring the animal. So, perhaps this is this would be helpful in those unlicensed practice situations where if you're doing a treatment, it has to be with the intent of minimizing the risk, not creating a larger risk.
Yeah, but at what point does it become intent versus
What actually
outcome?
happened?
So that's why I have a lot of trouble with this issue because it almost, it feels like we're going down a path of wanting to define and describe every possible, every possible time a human comes into a situation with an animal. And I just feel like it starts, we've gone down a rabbit hole that's gone a bit too far.
But I think this statement would also, I hear you about the intent, but we cannot make decisions of thinking of that small percentage of group that would potentially use this. There's always a workaround, right? Like people would find ways to work around the regulations. What I'm thinking is this statement is actually considering the concern brought about by the shelter community, our stakeholders from the shelter community, because they see these changes that we're proposing with the exemption of with this exemption, they could see the impact that it would have on a lot of the members of their community. And a lot of times it's also tied with availability of services, availability of resources, right? Now I cannot help but think about like how we were talking about, like what the meeting with the equine community with what they're saying, that they agree that this unlicensed practice are existing, but they really want to address it. But at the same time, they fear that if this is implemented, it would actually take away the resources to be able to take care of the animals, right? So it's like a balancing act. And I think this is similar to what we're discussing now. It is more of like a balancing act. We want to be able to be supportive of the shelter community that has brought up their concerns, which I think are valid concerns as well. But at the same time, we don't want it to be so, what you call this, like opening the gates, for everybody to just practice medicine. The definition that we've come up with, I think clearly, what you call it, shows that if you're going to do something, you better make sure that it is for the betterment of the pet and not, causing more harm. So it would fill in that gap, I believe. Dr. Bradbury?
I totally understand what you guys are saying and how in some ways this kind of negates the whole intent of this, and I hear what you're saying because this could be a workaround. I wonder if adding rendering basic animal first aid, because someone could claim that a surgery is an emergency surgery, but just basic animal first aid would sort of make it a little bit more clear. But I do think that I get what you guys are saying. But I also feel like this kind of needs to be in there somewhere where people can provide first aid. So
It just seems to me that somewhere along here, there has to be some common sense and a basic standard that the courts would approve of and everything else if it ever got that far, that it's not like we're approving that doing a C-section on a dog or a cat by an unlicensed and untrained person is just another thing. It's not. and no reasonable person would think that. I mean,
We'd hope.
pulling a twin out of a ewe or whatnot that's got a dystocia, I mean, that's husbandry and everything else. But I think if we go too far, make it too specific, I think we need to have the concept that is a reasonable thing to do for your animals.
Can we use rendering initial first aid? Like, is it initial? I mean, is there? I know that look. That'd be a no. Thank you, Tara. Thanks for that answer. I appreciate it.
So you can treat them once, but you can't, maintain the first aid until you can get the animal to the veterinarian, because we're talking about rural areas and availability.
That's why you do that, not I. It's not my job. I
And
got it.
I'm concerned about basic first aid. What is that? I'm looking that up, and it's CPR and wound management, cleaning and bandaging, fracture stabilization, choking relief, managing shock, burns and bleeding. I mean, that's going to encompass a lot of things that we're not thinking about right now.
But wouldn't not putting any parameters, first aid be any first aid? Wouldn't that be even bigger?
My question to you and your staff is, how do you and your staff define basic animal first aid?
There's no statute that has that, so we don't have to.
That's right,
I know.
but if you're going to go after unlicensed practice, you're going to have to provide the scope of the limitation. How did somebody violate the law? How did they go beyond basic animal first aid?
So my staff's not going to define first aid. We would look at the practice of veterinary medicine. And if there's not a law that defines what first aid is, we'd have to defer to our subject matter experts to what that is, or ask the board to do regs for it. But we're not going to.
Right. So the point here is, to be, tell people what they can and can't do. And when you say basic animal first aid, what is that? Am I going to get in trouble? That's the question. If I'm trying to, help my animal and I can't, their veterinarian isn't open for 2 days, what can I do?
Yeah. So without a definition though to first aid, and you're asking our staff to interpret that, that's an underground reg at that point.
Right. So either it is unlicensed practice or it's not. So the point is that we need to be specific on some level. It needs to be understood by the public and the board. What is allowable and what is unlawful conduct? I mean, I appreciate the difficulty in creating the list and having all these definitions.
I know I'm opening a can of worms, but to me, it really comes down to, you practicing medicine or not? Practicing medicine, not okay. Not practicing medicine and you're taking care of your own animal, fine. I just think we've gone so far with this, where we have to define, I mean, it's like we're trying to define every instance and every example, and we're never going to find an end to it by doing this, in which we really have to just straight up, it's either under our jurisdiction of practicing veterinary medicine or not.
Dr. Bradbury?
Well, I mean, applying a pressure bandage is practicing veterinary medicine. And if an animal's bleeding, we don't want them to let it just bleed and come to, bring it in, just gushing blood, like again, on a range setting and things like that. So, I get what the letters were saying, that there is, there's gray areas. And I think basic animal first aid, based on your description, Tara, it sounded somewhat like what we're talking about here, but I guess I could be wrong. Applying bandages to stop bleeding, you know, treating a burn, wrapping a burn, something, well, until they get to a veterinarian. I think applying a splint, I mean, I don't love applying a splint, but that's kind of what we're talking about here. So, but maybe we could open it up to public comment and see if some of the other wordsmiths out there, or see what they say about it. I don't know.
All right, so I guess there's a proposal to open up for public comment on the Section 8 line, rendering animal first aid to preserve the reduce pain and discomfort and minimize the risk of permanent disability or disfigurement, to stabilize the animal and provide comfort until a licensed veterinarian can assess the animal. And we do have a public comment in the room. Mr. Baxter?
Dan Baxter, Dan Baxter from the CVMA. Two comments, one small, one potentially larger. On pure wordsmithing, right now it's stated in the conjunctive, meaning you're going to have all three of those characteristics in order to render this type of treatment/service: first aid to preserve life,
Or
reduce pain and discomfort, and minimize the risk. I think the intent, if I'm garnering it correctly from the conversation, is that should be disjunctive. So you would want to say or minimize the risk. That's a small point. The larger point, a lot of the discussion here today thus far about what constitutes first aid, I find myself agreeing with Dr. Maniak. It's not really the practice of veterinary medicine. And so I think that leads me to really question the need for this subsection 8 as a general matter. Lastly, if you are going to kind of continue down the path of trying to craft language for section 8, subsection 8, I do think it needs to closely hew to the distinction between what is veterinary medicine and what isn't. Thanks.
all right, any other comments from the room?
Bonnie Lutz, I guess I really don't even know what to say. I have to give you credit for looking at this issue. I will say that I like Section 8, subsection 8, because I was concerned and voiced some of my concerns yesterday about some of the language. I totally understand this is a very difficult thing that you're doing, so I get it. And I don't have any magic answers, but I like 8 because I'm really concerned that people like myself who feel like they can do certain things on their own animals might get in trouble. And the thing that concerns me, frankly, is that veterinarians get some nasty complaints by their owners. And I'm afraid that's going to turn the tables around, is that if a person brings in an animal to a veterinarian and they have been trying to do first aid and the veterinarian just doesn't like the person, or the person's caused trouble for them before, they're going to be complaining to the board about that owner. I don't think you want to set up a situation where veterinarians are going to be turning owners into the board, because then it puts you in the very difficult position of determining whether what that owner was doing was correct or not correct, which is different than looking at equine people who have made a business out of doing things to equines. Or the reason for this whole change in this statute is not really to get after owners doing things to their own animals. So I understand that that's a big concern. I do like having subsection 8 because it at least clarifies it to some extent. And really, and I understand what Jessica's saying, that it's really not up to her staff to be able to interpret everything, but let's face it, they do it all the time. I mean, there are certain, there's regulations that are not clear. The one about providing humane care doesn't mean any sense whatsoever. And so we deal with that all the time, because that seems to get thrown in to every single complaint I look at. So, I mean, there are situations where the board staff and the experts do have to look at whether or not there is some kind of violation there. I think 8, subsection 8, at least gives some foundation for that. And as time goes on, the board and the staff and the experts have the ability to interpret it differently. I mean, let's face it, I've been doing this for 24 years, and things change as far as the interpretation of the statutes and regulations. So I use the example of pre and post spay pain medication. Like 20 years ago, I never saw that as a violation, and now that's always a violation. And that's not written
15
anyplace
seconds.
clearly in the statute. So anyway, that's just my comment. I think it's a good idea. I understand there's difficulties with the definition, but I think it'll be helpful in the long run. Thank you.
Okay, so no more public comments in the room. Moderator, could you please open it up for any public comments for those participating remotely?
Absolutely. WebEx is now open for public comment on agenda item 5A and the discussion that we've been listening to. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3, and mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button. That's the ... And our first request for comment comes from Nancy Ehrlich. Hold on just a moment, please. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
That have been made so far, but I have one from the opposite direction. This sentence says, until a licensed veterinarian can assess the animal. And what about the situation where a dog gets a laceration on its foot, the owner bandages it and looks at it the next day and it doesn't need to go to the vet, it's doing fine. So would that person then get in trouble for not taking their animal to the veterinarian because they rendered first aid? That's the end of my question.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Carrie Clay. Hold on just a moment, please. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi,
Are you
hello.
with it? Go ahead, please.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I have 2 points. I also second the question that Ms. Ehrlich put up, but I would like to say that this Section 8, if it is added, I would support I believe Dr. Grant's suggestion that husbandry practices be added because, as people have said, these things are done out in the field. I mean, I see mention in from friends about having to deal with abscesses on their donkeys. You know, you catch your donkey or you catch your dog or cat, they've got worms. What are you going to do about it? If you're a donkey owner, your friends and neighbors will tell you to go to the feed store and get some wormer. The other thing might be skin conditions. If you are say you are a shelter of some sort and you find a wombat in Australia, then you're looking at it, you know it has mange. So you go and get the mange stuff and treat the animal with a salve. The second point I have is that even by adopting, adding this husbandry clause and keeping the animal first aid part of it, I would say what you're doing is largely negating the need for this entire proposal, because I believe that this proposal other than criminalizing businesses who form to do things like insemination and whatnot, it's this whole proposal is really geared toward eliminating the owner exemption in favor of just livestock and food animal producers. So it's just I just want the board to see the forest for the trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Next and potentially last for this section is going to be Karen Atlas. Hold on just a moment, please. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi there, my name is Karen Atlas, and I am the coalition leader who represents veterinarians, physical therapists, RVTs, and the animal owning consumers. And I just wanted to bring up again that these proposals have not included any of our coalition's recommendations to be included, which includes allowing exemptions within the Vet Practice Act to actually empower veterinarians to collaborate with other qualified animal healthcare professionals, because that would help significantly. There's other healthcare providers who are not veterinarians, but are qualified to provide services safely and effectively by referral and under a veterinarian's supervision. So the Veterinary Practice Act strictly prohibits veterinarians from referring to anyone other than another veterinarian. So our recommendation was to allow an exemption to permit a veterinarian to refer their animal patients to another qualified non-vet professional. And that would serve several purposes. It would relieve this board's burden of some of these enforcement efforts, particularly against unlicensed activity that have had no complaints of harm done to them. So by separating these types of complaints, we can better prioritize things, or this board can hopefully better prioritize things to assure the protection of animals instead of reducing access to care. So California veterinarians have also been asking for greater ability to interprofessionally collaborate. So all of these things that we've discussed or that you've discussed on this piece of statute, I would kindly hope that our recommendations are taken into consideration as well, and perhaps it needs to be discussed further before moving this language forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And that indeed was our last request for comment. Do you wish to continue with the discussion?
Yes, and I guess we have another comment from the room.
Wonderful.
Hi, Bonnie Lutz again. I just wanted to address what Nancy had stated about the timing and rendering animal first aid. The way I read it, it says to reduce pain and discomfort and minimize the risk of permanent disability or disfigurement if the next day, what you did the previous day has relieved that pain and suffering. Then to me, the way I would interpret this if I were arguing it, would be that there was no need to take it to the vet because you had done what you set out to do. The way I read it is that if there's a continuing pain and discomfort or continuing bleeding, continuing whatever, then you have to take it to the vet.
Madam President, this is the moderator. We have another request on WebEx.
All right.
All right, we're going to call on dial-in user number 2. Hold on, caller 2. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You may need to dial *6 in order to unmute.
Hello, this is Dr. Joanne Bach. I'm a licensed veterinarian for the state of California. I'm also a certified rehab practitioner, and I wanted to comment about the approval of first aid needs for pets. I think that in the context of a pet owner providing immediate first aid care when they perceive a problem and a veterinarian is not available, that it should be allowed. For instance, if there was active bleeding and it's widely practiced to put pressure on a wound, or possibly to cleanse it with a proper veterinary over-the-counter product for first aid as it's sold. Client, pet owner quicks a nail, needs to apply quick stop to a wounded nail. Farmer sees large animal wounded in the field, wants to provide some immediate care, call an ambulatory vet, which may not be able to immediately get out to the premises. So I think that in part, veterinarians need to educate their clients about first aid for pets and what to do in the event of, and of course, follow it up with, please call your veterinarian for advice. Be advised to whether the pet needs to come in and be seen, get the follow-up on that pet patient, as you have mentioned the next day, what happens if it seems all better. So I think that, yes, better defining that section, the addition of the animal husbandry, I think is also excellent suggestion. But also let's get, more information out to veterinarians in general to educate their clients from the get-go when, pets are puppies and so forth in terms of what's first aid. And yes, distinguishing that kind of immediate first aid from what is the practice of veterinary medicine. I think Karen Atlas opening up to other unlicensed practitioners being involved, I think that is another matter and kind of stepping over this particular
15 seconds.
section. I think that it's not appropriate for general public to treat other pets or other unlicensed practitioners to treat other pets without having proper licensure for the practice of veterinary medicine.
Thank you for your comment. And those are all of our requests for public comment at the moment.
All right, thank you, moderator. So I guess we go back to discussion, and I think Dr. Bradbury has a comment.
Thanks. I guess I still would be okay with adding husbandry, but I did have a question for Jessica. It's come up several times that this really does sort of negate the whole purpose of this this legislation. Is that how you see this as well?
I think I echo Dr. Maniak's concerns about individuals trying to use this and saying that they are reducing discomfort and being able to provide the treatment to animals, because it's no longer one's own animal, it's just animals. And if the interpretation is too that, well, if they're able to minimize the discomfort and they don't need a veterinarian, then they've done their job and they have now been exempted from the Practice Act.
I would like to state that Dr. Bradbury, you started off with something very important in your statement, in that it's very frustrating that we've worked really hard to make this document inclusive and have open and transparent conversations, and with the shelter community, and now including rescues. And it can't be, Dr. Nunez said, we still have to have rules, and we have to make sure that we are protecting the consumer and pets. And so we can't just make this document for everybody how everybody wants it, because that, I've said this before, compromise means that everybody has to give a little. And I don't feel that we've had transparency on all sides, because there's no communication except for the letters. We get letters, but There's not a lot of feedback. Otherwise, there's no comments. There's nobody speaking up when, during our meetings and having a two-way conversation during our meetings. And that's frustrating for me. So I have to go back to, as nice as it would be to be able to put this in, I have to agree with Dr. Maniak in that I think it's clear. It's, if it's practicing veterinary medicine, it's not okay. But yeah, I'm going to end there.
I think that one thing that wasn't shared from the MDC discussion was when our legal counsel raised a suggestion to restructure this to aim it toward what we're trying to really prevent. You still end up with a list, and I still have my own concerns with that. But when asked, I had shared that I, at this point, would take something rather than nothing, and I'm not sure how successful this current proposal is going to be. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. But her suggestion was to look at maybe listing what you want to prevent, like surgery, to start. So I'm only bringing that up because that was brought up during the MDC.
Yeah, I have concerns about how successful this is going to be as well. I mean, that's one of my concerns, and I would love to make this have the best chance possible. So that is also a concern of mine.
I guess for me, going back to the report shared by Dr. Nunez with regards to the consultation with Dr. Hurley, with the concerns that she brought up, and also reading the letters, reading beyond the emotions of that letter, I would say I've been in that situation, and so I understand. And when you are exposed to an environment where your resources are very limited, and you see on the other side of the balance are like the inability to provide the like standard of care that you would want. I understand also, and this is one of the things that I've expressed to my colleagues in the shelter community as well, is the fact that it is unfortunate that there are those people that have taken advantage, of the situations. But I feel that this is something that at least would try to make things work for both. As Bonnie had said, the language would somewhat create rule, of what can and cannot be done. I mean, we have legislation where people really interpret it way out of, and use that in their defense, you're right? So people will use words to benefit them. And I don't think we will ever have the perfect language. But I think the way that this is written, especially with Mr. Baxter's comment that maybe we should change it to or rather than and, is reasonable. I think it would provide some what you call this, like a message to the shelter community that we are trying to work with them. We are listening to what their concerns are, because I would say a lot of their concerns are valid. So that's just my take on things. Dr. Grant?
Two items. One, to address Dr. Bradbury's concerns about the original intent of having this whole thing start with unlicensed practice. I don't believe adding Section 8 is going to deter from that, because what we were looking at specifically, someone could not come in and inject the coffin joints or knee joints or fetlock joints on 8 or 10 horses every week or every other week at a polo ground and say that was for emergency care. I mean, it's just not a reasonable assumption. And I would think that the courts would bear us out that this is not a reasonable thing. This person's not practicing first aid and providing, first aid to the animal, even though they may think that they're the owner because, their husband is a trainer or not. So I think that, in fact, if this goes through, it would still allow the original intent, at least for my part, of being able to limit unlicensed practice, that they would not have an out just because they say they're going to provide first aid care. And I still believe strongly that the term of animal husbandry, the management, whatever you want to define animal husbandry and providing emergency first aid care is a legitimate thing. I can't see where necessarily combing the cat's hair for fleas is, like an emergency thing, but it certainly is an animal husbandry technique.
Doctor, just a clarification. If somebody does these injections that you say they would say is like first aid, if they continue doing that, would that do harm to the animal?
It certainly does. They keep doing it over and over again. The joint wears out and the horses have to end up being crippled and often have to be put
So
to
that's what
sleep.
I'm thinking. This line, section 8, is basically to say that you are not to do anything that would cause permanent disability or disfigurement or harm to the animal. So if you're doing first aid, you know it's just palliative until you get care. Or if it turns out that it worked, then, eventually we have to look at the big picture, not just very specific. So that's what I'm thinking, because I feel like comparing the situation with horses and now with like small animals that are being part of like a lot of the rescue groups are concerned about, they're not the same. So, yeah, microphone.
Until a licensed veterinarian can assess the animal, the example was given, like you put something on a pond, by the next day the dog's better or whatnot. So you call up your veterinarian and say, show them a picture on yourself. This was what it's like. The dog's walking fine. Do I need to come in or not? That's just a reasonable approach that reasonable people would use.
Dr. Bradbury?
So two things. One is, I don't know if we need to continue to even discuss this if we don't have the votes, because it sounds like we may have 3 members who are against this anyway. But if we did want to continue the discussion on it, we could add the husbandry, and then I don't know about if we wanted to add emergency first aid or emergent first aid, but yeah, those are my final comments, I think.
Okay, before we put it in for a vote, can we have clarification of exactly what the amendments are for today?
Yeah, so what's currently showing on your screen is what the amendment would be, the additional amendment.
I've heard a request to further revise this paragraph. I've heard add animal husbandry and I've heard add basic before animal first aid. So I think,
An emergency.
right, well, you liked basic, I think then it was emergency. I think this paragraph 8 needs some additional tweaking from what I'm hearing. So you just add, some additional words for this paragraph, but we also have a potential amendment to paragraph 4.
Do we want to add husbandry? Okay. Let's just see so members can and the public can see what it would look like if rendering animal husbandry services. And emergency first aid And you can strike animal. And where it says and minimize the risk, the suggestion was to change and to or. So for those who requested husbandry services and emergency first aid and the or, is that what you were thinking?
I thought it was or provide comfort.
Oh, sorry. So the or that you just changed, Justin, sorry, that should be and the and before that should be or. No? Okay, they're both going to be or. The and where it says and discomfort right before that. Or. That's what.
I think it was supposed to be and emergency first aid to preserve life, reduce pain and discomfort, comma, minimize the risk of permanent disability or disfigurement to stabilize the animal, or provide comfort until a licensed veterinarian.
We also need or before minimize, because it's reduce
Okay.
pain and discomfort. Sorry, it begins with preserve life, reduce pain and discomfort, or minimize the risk. And that's the end of the list, the first list, and then it's to stabilize the animal or provide comfort. So that's a second list.
Perfect.
Okay, do we want to go back up to 4? Because we had requested that Tara propose a change to that as well. Justin, would you mind scrolling up to 4?
Okay, line 3, the person is insert administering the treatment in their capacity as. That's it.
Okay, after reading the amendments, is there anybody else who has any comment? If not, is there a motion for us to approve these amendments? Or the proposal?
I move that the board adopt the proposal as amended.
I'll second that.
Oh. I guess we have to read the language on
Okay,
how we're moving the motion.
Can we scroll back up then, please?
Page 6.
I move that the board move to submit to the California State Legislation the attached legislative proposal with amendments to amend BPC sections 480.25.1 and 480.27 regarding veterinary medicine practice exemptions.
I second that.
Okay, now we would like to open the floor for public comment in the room. If I don't see any public comments, moderator, could you please open the line for public comments for this motion?
Absolutely. WebEx is now open for the motion before us. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. And mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button. That's the ... First, we're going to call on Karen Atlas. Hold on just a moment, please. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi there, this is Karen Atlas, the president of the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition. I just wanted to state for the record that the board has not considered our recommendations for inclusion into the amendments about unlicensed practice, and I wanted to make that clear for this body today. Thank you.
Thank you. And that appears to be our only request for public comment at the moment.
All right, since there are no more public comments, I think we move on to vote.
Ms. Pulaski,
I'm considering this. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I feel it's giving it the best chance. So I'm going to say yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza,
Yes.
Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Maniak,
No.
Dr. Solocito,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right. That took us a long time, but again, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate MDC's work on this. I know the extensive discussion and extensive work behind this really shows the intent of the board to really listen to all the stakeholders and try to do the best thing, to adhere to our mission to protect our consumers and the animals. So having said that, we will break for lunch and we will resume at 1 o'clock. Thank you. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon session. Before we continue, I just want to make a statement with regards to a public comment earlier that the proposal or the recommendation is not being considered by the board. Actually, the recommendation had been considered. It's just that the board does not agree with the recommendations presented. Now, we also recognize that we have new board members that, if the parties involved would like to revisit the conversation, maybe that would be something that we could open up in future agenda for the board. That's it. And so now we continue with agenda item number 5, section C, to be continued by our chair of our MDC.
Thank you. So item 5C is a recommendation to initiate a rulemaking to amend California Code of Regulations Title 16, Section 2068.5 regarding practical experience in education as equivalent curriculum. A little background on this, the RBT subcommittee was tasked with evaluating the RBT registration pathways and making recommendations to the MDC and ultimately the board related to whether the combination of practical experience and education set forth in 2068.5 should continue to be considered equivalent to a 2-year curriculum in an animal health technology program. BPC 4841.5 specifies 3 educational pathways to obtain RBT registration. The first is graduating from an accredited 2-year veterinary technology program. All schools or degree programs accredited by the AVMA are deemed to have the minimum requirements for board-approved schools or degree programs. The second is a combination of education and clinical practice experience. This involves completing 20 semester units, which is the equivalent of 30 quarter units or 300 hours of instruction, combined with 4,416 hours of directed clinical practice experience in specific areas under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. This is to be equivalent to the 2-year curriculum. Option 3 is the equivalency certification by the AAVSB for RBT applicants who hold veterinary technician licenses, certificates, or registrations in other states or territories of the United States or Canada, but do not otherwise qualify for California RBT registration. After multiple stakeholder meetings, the subcommittee recommended the regulation for equivalency certification be repealed. The overall reason was that education is important to patient and client safety, as it provides the foundation to why RBT tasks are performed, that clinical experience alone, which provides the foundation as to how RBT tasks are performed, cannot provide. The board approved this during its January 2025 meeting. The subcommittee also raised concerns related to educational and clinical experience components in 2068.5. The subcommittee's concerns were presented to the board at its January 2025 meeting, and the board authorized the MDC to evaluate this regulation closer to consider whether the qualified instructor criteria is adequate for consumer protection and to review the number of required clinical practice experience hours. The subcommittee met in February 2025 to discuss the educational and clinical practice requirements in 2068.5. The subcommittee recommends the board initiate a rulemaking to amend this section to address concerns related to qualified instructors, the number and location of required clinical practice hours, and the supervising veterinarian's license and attestation requirements. The subcommittee does not recommend reducing the existing education hours. The qualified instructor in section 2068.5 subsection A states in part the following. The education shall consist of a minimum of 20 semester units, 30 quarter units, or 300 hours of instruction. The education shall be provided by a post-secondary academic institution or a qualified instructor who satisfies the qualification requirements of subsection E1. At the time the regulation was enacted, there weren't many education programs available in California, and they all required in-person attendance. To address the availability concern, this section on qualified instructor was added with the belief that if an instructor met the qualifications listed, they met the same quality as those teaching at a post-secondary academic institution. Those requirements specified the instructor must meet at least 2 of the following. A license, registration, or certificate in an area related to the subject matter of the course. The license, registration, or certificate shall be current, valid, and free from restrictions due to disciplinary action by this board or any other healthcare regulatory agency. B, a master's or higher degree from an educational institution in an area related to the subject matter of the course. C, training, certification, or experience in teaching the subject matter of the course. Or D, at least 2 years experience in an area related to the subject matter of the course. In the last few years, the board has received registration applications from individuals claiming to have completed the required curriculum through qualified instructors that likely did not meet the intent of the regulation. In addition, in the last decade, many more accredited and post-secondary education programs have opened in California. According to the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education's database, there are at least 50 veterinary technician programs operating in California. Also, after COVID-19, many accredited and non-accredited post-secondary education programs have moved to solely online courses. Since the concerns regarding availability of courses of education programs appear to no longer be an issue, and courses are more accessible than ever before, the subcommittee recommends striking or a qualified instructor who satisfies the qualification requirements of subsection E1 and all of subsection E. Striking these sections will ensure the RBT applicants are obtaining the equivalent quality of education as originally intended. As far as clinical practice hours are concerned, currently, RBT applicants applying for registration under the Combined Education Experience Pathway are required to complete 4,416 hours of directed clinical practice under the supervision of a California licensed veterinarian. When the board previously discussed a similar requirement for out-of-state licensed veterinarians to complete the same number of hours, the board's recommendation to the California State Legislature was a proposal to decrease that number to 2,500 hours. During that discussion, the board raised concerns that the 4,416 hours were excessive and potentially punitive to individuals with children who may not be able to meet that requirement as easily as individuals without children. For these same reasons, and since the Combined Education and Experience Pathway requires both education and clinical practice, the subcommittee feels the 4,416 hours of clinical practice required for this route should be decreased to 2,500 hours. The subcommittee is also concerned with the onerous requirement the clinical practice experience be completed under the direct supervision of a California licensed veterinarian. The board has approved the rulemaking to repeal the out-of-state registrant pathway under 2068.6. Once enacted, there would not be a clear path for RVTs who are licensed, certified, or registered in another state to obtain a registration in California if they graduated from a non-accredited veterinary technician program. The only option for out-of-state applicants would be to redo their clinical practical experience under a California licensed veterinarian. Subcommittee thinks that this is an unnecessary barrier, and out-of-state applicants should be able to use their clinical practice experience hours obtained in another state towards California licensure. Removing this barrier to California RVT registration may increase the number of RVT registrants and increase access to veterinary care. Thus, the subcommittee recommends striking the California license requirement in 2068.5 subsection F. However, the subcommittee asked the MDC to consider whether there should be a limitation on where the supervising veterinarian should be licensed and or where the RVT registration applicant's clinical practice should occur. The MDC was given a regulatory proposal with 3 options. The first option required the veterinary supervisor to be licensed in any state or territory in the United States or Canada. This was mirrored after the clinical practice requirement for veterinarian applicants who had passed the national exam over 5 years from the date of application. Option 2 required the applicant's clinical practice hours to occur in any state or territory of the United States or Canadian province under the direct supervision of any licensed veterinarian. So there was no specification on where the veterinarian was licensed. And that was to address the potential for the applicant to obtain clinical practice experience in another country where practice standards may be significantly different than those in North America. And option 3 in that proposal combined option 1 and 2. The MDC did prefer option 3 in that proposal and felt that it best encompassed the goals. Notably, each of the above options would reduce the clinical practice experience hours from 4,416 to 2,500 and resolve the supervising veterinarian's attestation statement issues discussed further below. So further down on your memo, it talks about those. 2068.5 subsection F requires the veterinarian supervising the clinical practice of the RVT registration applicant to attest to the completion of that experience at the time the application is made to the board for the registered veterinary technician examination. Since applicants no longer apply with the board to take the VTNE, but instead apply to take the VTNE directly to the examination administrator, this requirement is interpreted to mean submission of the attestation at the time of the application for RVT registration. However, this requirement has proved difficult for individuals who may have completed clinical practice experience at various points in their career and under various supervising veterinarians. The board also received an application for which the applicant struggled to document their clinical practice experience due to the supervising veterinarian passing away before the time of application submission. It's common for an applicant to have completed clinical practice experience under multiple supervising veterinarians and potentially multiple locations. And since clinical practice experience does not expire, the subcommittee recommends striking at the time the application is made to the board for the registered veterinary technician examination from subsection F. This regulatory amendment would allow each supervising veterinarian to attest to the clinical practice hours as soon as they were completed. Section 2068.5 subsection G states the following. The directed clinical practice required in subsection F shall have provided the applicant with knowledge, skills, and abilities in the areas of communication with clients, patient examinations, emergency procedures, laboratory procedures, diagnostic imaging, surgical assisting, anesthesia, animal nursing, nutrition, dentistry, animal behavior, and pharmacology. The supervising veterinarian shall complete a checklist attesting to proficiency in specific areas within the preceding categories. The subcommittee recommends amending the language in subsection G to allow the supervising veterinarians to attest only to those categories the supervisor oversaw and is comfortable attesting to. Since the knowledge, skills, and abilities may be gained under multiple supervising veterinarians over time, a supervising veterinarian may have only overseen the applicant's patient examinations, client communications, and surgical assisting, but not the other areas. A supervising veterinarian should be able to attest to only those categories for which the veterinarian supervising the applicant, rather than the entire list. So there is a recommendation to eliminate the checklist. Over the last decade, the board has directed RVT registration applicants to submit a completed registered veterinary technician task list for proof of experience checklist to meet the requirement under section 2068.5 subsection G. However, this checklist is far more extensive than the general categories listed in subsection G. And the checklist is not incorporated by reference in regulation. Subcommittee believes there are multiple outdated and unnecessary tasks on this checklist. Overall, they believe the board should trust the professional judgment of the licensed veterinarian supervisor who is attesting to the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the applicant in each category. If a supervisor is willing to sign a statement attesting to the applicant's knowledge, skills, and abilities in each category, that should be sufficient to meet this requirement. As such, the subcommittee recommends removal of the checklist requirement from subsection G. Board staff also had a recommendation regarding the proof of education for education and experience pathways. In 2068.5 subsection D, it requires RVT registration applicants applying through the combination pathway to provide the board with a syllabus or an outline for each course and documentation of attendance. Accepting course outlines and proof of attendance from candidates risks the board receiving altered documents. Proof of completion should be provided directly to the board from the primary source or primary source verified. Section 4841.5 subsection A requires proof of graduation be submitted directly to the board by the college, other post-secondary institution, or AAVSB. Notably, proof of completion of education is not required to be submitted by education providers for combined education and experience pathway applicants in section 4841.5 subsection B. In the board's 2025 sunset review report, they requested amendments to section 4841.5 to expand and clarify the RVT registration pathways. Board staff recommends additional amendments to this statute to require for the combination of education and experience pathway proof of completion of education to be submitted directly to the board by the post-secondary institution or by AAVSB. Until such amendments go into effect, board staff recommends 2068.5 subsection D be amended to require proof of completion of education be sent directly to the board from the post-secondary institution or AAVSB. If this provision is included in the board sunset bill, the proposed amendments to subsection D would be unnecessary, and subsection D in its entirety could be proposed to be repealed during the 45-day public comment period of the rulemaking process. So again, the MDC discussed and voted on this item yesterday, choosing the option 3 pathway. There was a minor amendment to the regulatory proposal that was emailed yesterday, and that is on page 2 of the proposal. It was 2068.5 D, and at the end of that, they added as applicable. So it reads, proof of completion of education specified under subsection A shall be submitted directly to the board by the post-secondary institution or American Association of Veterinary State Boards as applicable. So if the board agrees with the MDC and staff recommendations, please entertain a motion to take the actions listed there regarding this regulatory text.
Okay, so agenda item 5C is now open for discussion by the board. Anybody has any comments? Board members?
Sorry, guys, I'm gonna do it. So I struggled with this because of my own comments yesterday. And I struggle, and I know Dr. Bradbury has a comment too. And it has to do with eliminating the RVT checklist. And so I did get some advice on this, and I appreciate this, Elizabeth. So there were suggestions yesterday brought up that we could reference the CVTA TEA checklist. However, then we run into the same thing is, does it change? Is it extensive? And so a recommendation was that we could still use G, but create a little more clarity in G by just itemizing out a few things, but a little broader, but not so specific in those things, but giving people a little more information as to what we're looking for. So I think that might be necessary because I think it's important to say what we mean when we say that they have to have knowledge, skills, and ability in the areas of communication. What are we talking about? I think that it's important to be able to define these things a little bit more and provide a little more guidance to veterinarians.
Okay, Dr. Bradbury?
Yeah, I was listening to the meeting yesterday, but I actually wasn't able to, I had to step away with the final vote, so I wasn't sure where that all landed. There were two things. One was the checklist, and it did seem that there were multiple comments, both from the MDC as well as stakeholders, that the checklist would be helpful. So that I wasn't sure where that ended up. It sounds like it just continued to be removed. But then there was also a comment from Dr. Grant about certain international veterinary nurses that some of this language might be, and maybe it wouldn't change it, but it prevents them from having any pathway to becoming registered here unless they repeat everything now that the PAVE program is done. And so I just didn't know if anybody talked more about that and what the outcome of those concerns were.
Okay, Marie?
If my memory serves me correct, part of the discussion on the out-of-the-country programs with the elimination of PAVE was that there are many online programs where they could receive the educational portion to bring them up to the equivalency of the US and Canadian programs.
But would the language still allow them because that's where the let's see here. I'm just trying to.
And that was directed to the clinical practice as well, we weren't talking about the education at that point. It was about using option 3 and the clinical practice of where they were gaining that experience. The concern was if they gained it in another country, not then applying they would have to redo that clinical experience.
So they would have to come here and do that.
For the clinical experience, the clinical experience should be done in the state or territory of the United States or Canadian province. And the discussion surrounding that was to address the concern that if they are getting that clinical experience in another country, they might be doing that under a lower standard of care that is not the standard that is within the United States or Canadian province. So I think that's ultimately why the MDC chose to keep it with option 3.
Okay, and aren't there like AVMA accredited like areas of the world that we have reciprocity with, like the UK? I don't know. Anyway, that was just that question, and then the checklist. I guess it sounds like once it all was said and done, it was decided not to include it. Okay.
So Dr. Bradbury, I think the AVMA accreditation and the clinical practice are getting confused. So that's why it's clinical practice, it doesn't have anything to do with AVMA accreditation. And I understand that the there may be sites that are AVMA accredited, but it has nothing to do with they're getting clinical practice.
Except
So
that
clinical
they're
experience.
except that they're practicing under veterinarians that are in an area that is accredited, like in the UK. Like we basically, I mean, so it isn't, I'm not confusing that. I'm just saying that there, there's areas that we have a standard that has been approved by the AVMA. I guess maybe it's because it's there could be other schools or something or veterinarians practicing in that country. Okay, I'm not, yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I think that's where we went to the subcommittee looked for the MDC because we struggled with the same thing. Speaking from this, we went back and forth and we did had this exact conversation. And how do you regulate something that's not in your purview at all? And so you have no idea where they're getting their clinical practice. You don't know. And you don't know who that veterinarian is, and you have no way of knowing who that veterinarian is that they're getting their where they're getting that clinical practice.
Yes, Mrs. Suri.
Just to touch on your question on the checklist too, and what happened with that. We did ultimately decide not to include it, but there was discussion about the fact that if it's not incorporated, the concepts still need to be there because we need to make sure that that education route or that is equivalent to the standard education route. There was talk about the CVTA EA checklist, but some of that did not apply or varied too greatly from G. And then Dr. Goodkin specifically agreed that as a supervising veterinarian, a checklist might be helpful to ensure the completeness of what they were signing off on as a supervising veterinarian. Ultimately, we decided that they're still attesting to the items that are already listed in G. So if we do go that route with a checklist, I think a new one, we did talk about creating a new one because of the other one being outdated and not rationalized in regulation.
That's actually my question, is that deciding to eliminate the checklist, was there ever like a consideration of maybe just updating the checklist or developing a checklist for the attesting veterinarian? Because I just feel like if it's too broad, then we may be opening ourselves up to like basically allowing folks that are not really qualified. So.
Yeah, so then it comes down to who's going to maintain the checklist and who's going to be responsible for updating the checklist, because obviously this checklist has been around and nobody even really knew about it or updated it, and they're very outdated items. So that's where it became somebody has to be responsible, and the responsible party becomes the board. So, it's part of our Practice Act. And that's, I made a comment yesterday, and this is what the comment can go both ways. And I said to Dr. Gedkin, she mentioned that there were items in the CVTEA checklist about rabbits and ferrets and, their husbandry stuff in there. And I said that RVTs are tested on it in the VT&E. And my comment can either be taken as they have to learn about it elsewhere anyway, because they're going to learn about it because they have to take the VT&E, or it can be taken as that checklist needs to be provided because it's there and we need to create a checklist, and that's our, let's make sure that they know about it, and we need to provide a checklist because it's on there because they need to know about it. So you can take either side of it, but that was the comment that I made, and it kind of enlightened me to think that it's a thorough checklist, and maybe I need to rethink this checklist idea.
And I think the NDC also discussed going back and forth on whether to include that checklist, but they ultimately decided to not include it because of it was so specific and every time that something is updated or becomes outdated, the board would have to do a new rulemaking in order to update it, which we can do that. It's cumbersome to do. But also the discussion kind of shifted to that we're not just talking about just clinical practice experience. This is a veterinarian who is checking off on all of those categories listed in G, but it's also with the education that they have also obtained and the test itself. So it's not the only measure that they're competent, then minimally competent to enter the practice. This is just one of the 3 requirements.
I guess Dr. Bradbury still has a comment.
I know that if I were providing this service to an RVT, I would really appreciate a checklist, because what parts of anesthesia are important or not important, like for me, it's anyway, I think it's all important, but I think that having a checklist would be a good idea. I think that the extra work that the board has to do, like that's not necessarily a good reason not to do something that is helpful and important. It's something that we could have a standing MDC committee on, I think, potentially, and it could be written in there that it is to be updated every X amount of years as part of it, so that we don't have to do a new rulemaking package each time. I guess I don't know if that's a legal way of doing it, but just one idea.
Mr. Espinosa?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question. Existing subdivision G mentions a checklist, but where is there further description of the details of the content of this checklist that exists? Is that in a different regulation?
No, that's where the problem lies. So in the memo, it links to the checklist that the board is currently using. And in that checklist, the items listed in G are a header. And then under each header, there's a separate list under each header that goes beyond what's in the regulation. And so the board is left with, okay, so we can't use the current checklist and deny applications because certain boxes under the headers are not checked, because that's not supported by law. But if the board does want to use a detailed checklist like that, we can create one. It just has to either be incorporated by reference, or as referenced earlier, you would just make that more specific of what the categories are that you want included.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, the intention is to actually create a more detailed checklist for the attestation of the veterinarian, correct? In lieu of the elimination of this existing task list for the RVTs, correct?
So if you want to keep a checklist, then where in G where it's struck, it would just remain. But then we would have to have the board review and approve what that checklist would be. And we would incorporate that by reference in G, or if it's a smaller list, you can add it to G so that you wouldn't have to have a separate checklist incorporated by reference.
Sorry, I just want to chime in. It sounds like if that's the direction that the board is leaning towards, then it probably should just go back to the subcommittee to come up with either language. You could do both. You can come up with language within the actual reg or update the checklist and then use that for discussion.
So are there any other comments? If not, do we have a motion?
No, you don't need to, we don't need to, but is there an issue with using CVTEA's list if it's regularly updated?
the concern that was raised yesterday is that it's far more extensive
Far
than
more.
what it should be.
Yeah.
So that was just, it was discussed yesterday. So I'm just sharing that.
Yeah.
We could look at that further too, and just see if that was something. I think kind of the message here is that there needs to be some more work in the subcommittee.
Does everybody agree? Okay, Dr. Grant.
Yeah, if we're going to go back to the subcommittee, then I really think that we need to re-examine the possibility of get the clinical training by an AVMA accredited graduate could be in a foreign country. I mean, there's 18 of them listed here, Australia and England, Ireland. I think they could all be very well trained veterinarians. I mean, I know a number of them in equine are very well trained, and they could provide the training for veterinary technicians and, have a work shortage or something like that. We need to have more people. I think it would be nice to be able to open the doors to them. If they got the training over there, I don't think it'd be that much different than it would be here. And as long as they work for a veterinarian that was graduated from an AVMA accredited school. But there's 5 or 6 schools in England. There are 2 or 3 in Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, Scotland, Ireland.
Yeah, it looks like there's a lot more work that needs to be done to make sure that we're having a clear, like, direction of what we're going to do. So we're going to send it back to the MDC for more work and then revisit this in the next meeting.
And I just want to make a note, the board had approved to repeal 2068.6, which essentially eliminated that out-of-state registered as equivalent path. But I let the executive committee know that I think it's best to hold off on repealing that until this is addressed. Otherwise, individuals who are currently registered in another state and have the clinical practice experience would have to redo all of that experience to get a license in California if we move forward with the repeal. So I recommend that we still hold off on 2068.6 until 2068.5 creates that path for them. And so then we can combine the 2 regulatory packages together and move them at the same time. So I just wanted to put that out there.
All right, I guess Dr. Bradbury first.
Sorry, I don't mean to be a pain. I just wondered if those were my 2 concerns, but I just wondered if anyone else had any other concerns so that we did if with the rest of it, because so the MDC knows what whether it's just there's a lot in this and it's a lot to digest. So I didn't know if there was anything else that anyone else was seeing.
I think the concern that we have is that the existing task list is outdated and it's so extensive and it requires a lot of work, placed on who's going to be overseeing it, right? And that's why there's a consideration for a different checklist for the attesting veterinarian. So I guess that's where the MDC is being directed to look into that. So we could at least not just eliminating the task list without an appropriate like correction or, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I meant for the rest of the whole package that was presented, because that was all we talked about, and I didn't, so that if there was anything else in this package other than what those 2 things with the out of country and then the checklist, if there was anything else any other things that needed to be looked at by the MDC. So I don't, that was the only other thought I had.
Okay. For me, I don't have any other concerns, but I don't know about the other board members. Nothing. All right, but I think Tara has something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that Ms. Ussery had sufficient information to report back to the subcommittee on the new direction. Right now, what I've got is reviewing a checklist to incorporate or otherwise revise in the regulation and review foreign clinical practice experience for sufficiency for this licensure pathway.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, now we would like to open the floor for public comment for item 5C. Looks like there's no public comment from the room. Moderator, could you please open the line for those participating remotely?
All right, WebEx is open for public comment on 5C as in Charlie. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3. And mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. Our first comment's coming from Nancy Elric. Hold on just a moment, please. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Afternoon. I think that the checklist is really important, but I think we may have solved the problem right here on page 6. The third paragraph under eliminating the checklist says if a supervisor is willing to sign a statement attesting to the applicant's knowledge, skills, and ability in each category, that should be sufficient to meet the requirement. So why can't we just have a very simple checklist that has each one of the categories on it? And then the veterinarian, as the person achieves each category, the veterinarian can sign off on it. And it could have each one of these could be signed by a different veterinarian. So I think having a checklist is critical, but making it too complicated is probably not necessary. And I think that just a simple list like this would suffice. And then on the other issue of foreign graduate RVTs, I asked why PAVE eliminated the RVT route, and I was told the reason they discontinued it is because there weren't sufficient number of candidates using it. And if that's the case, then I don't think we really need to worry too much about it because we're not getting people from other countries very often. And the very few people who are coming from other countries besides Canada can use the alternate route or, yeah, use the alternate route. Those are my comments.
Thank you. And that was our only request for public comment at the moment.
Thank you. So now I guess we're moving on to the next item on our agenda, item 5D.
Okay. Agenda item 5D is the recommendation on legislative proposal to amend BPC section 4905 regarding the board's fee structure. During the October 2019 board meeting, the board approved raising all fees set in regulation to their statutory caps to prevent the board from going insolvent. The new fees became effective in January 2020. At that time, the board recognized the fee increase disproportionately impacted RVTs and committed to lowering RVT fees through its next sunset bill. The board also informed licensees and stakeholders that the sunset bill would likely need to increase the statutory caps for all licensing fees. Through Assembly Bill 1535, the RVT application and initial and renewal registration fees decreased by 36% from $350 to $225. To compensate for the lost revenue, the board increased the initial veterinary premises registration fees from $400 to $500 and premises renewal fees to $525. The board also increased the VACSP application initial and renewal permit fees from $50 to $100. The board initially intended to create a tiered fee structure related to the size of the veterinary premises, with the intent to have larger veterinary premises pay larger fees and keep the fees lower for veterinarians and RVTs. However, at that time, the board didn't have data to make accurate fund condition projections. The board decided to start collecting data related to veterinary premises employees, expecting enough data by the following sunset review to create the tiered structure. In addition, due to various internal cost-saving measures, the board's fund condition projections improved, and it became evident that the board could sustain itself through 2026 without increasing the statutory caps. The board informed licensees and stakeholders that a statutory cap increase would be necessary during the 2026 sunset review. In its 2025 sunset review report, the board noted fund projections dropping below its 3-month statutory minimum in fiscal year 2029-30, and the board would need to seek statutory cap increases through its sunset bill. In March 2025, the committee met with board staff numerous times and reviewed the following: veterinary premises employee data collected over the last 4 years, various other states' veterinary premises fee structures, current fund projections over the next 10 years, various potential fee models and their impact on the board's funds, which were prepared by the DCA Budget Office, fee structure goals, which included creating a veterinary premises tiered fee structure, recommending incremental fee increases for all license types with the largest impact focusing on the veterinary premises, maintaining a healthy fund condition. The DCA recommendation for this is 12 to 15 months in reserve. Prevent the need to seek a statutory increase each sunset cycle, and to delay the need for a fee increase through regulation as long as possible. Based on the above, we created a proposed fee structure for MDC and board, well, for board consideration at this point. The MDC considered it yesterday. This was in attachment 1. This fee structure included 4 incremental increases, with the first increase not occurring until fiscal year 28-29, and the last increase projected to occur in fiscal year 34-35, and carry the board through fiscal year 35-36. The last increase is the recommended statutory cap to request through the board's current sunset bill. While the board collected data on multiple employee types at registered veterinary premises, the proposed tiered structure is based on the number of full-time equivalent veterinarians who work at each premises. The 3 tiers are broken up as follows: a small veterinary premises, which is 1 to 3 veterinarians, a medium, which is 4 to 8 veterinarians, and a large, which is 9+ veterinarians. Based on the data, roughly 80% of the registered premises would be categorized as small, 16% as medium, and 4% as large. The medium and large would see the most significant impact from the proposed structure. In addition, some states charge an additional $25 for each mobile unit tied to a registered veterinary premises. While these mobile units are not required to obtain separate registrations under California law, board inspectors still inspect each mobile unit identified during an inspection. Due to the increased workload associated with inspecting mobile units, the proposal includes a $25 fee for each mobile unit tied to a fixed veterinary premises. You'll note in this that there is a disproportionate impact to VACSP holders. This significant increase for the VACSP related fees is more closely aligned with the RVT fees. While the VACSP application process is faster than the RVT process, the enforcement workload tied to the VACSP is more than the workload tied to the RVTs. This is due to the fact that many VACSP applicants have an existing criminal history, and once they receive their permits, they tend to have more subsequent arrests than their RVT counterparts. In addition, veterinary premises owners presumably cover the costs of the VACSP more often than they do for the RVT. The proposals do not align with the recommendation to have roughly 12 to 15 months in reserve. As shown in attachment 2, the analysis of the board's fund condition, the board's reserves are estimated to drop to 4.4 months and only reach 5.5 months by fiscal year 35-36. However, board staff estimates the actual reserves will end up higher than projected for the following reasons. The first is historical reversion. The board's fund condition presumes the board will expend its full budget allocation each year. Over the last several years, the board has reverted small portions back to its fund each year. Point-in-time projections. The board's fund condition is a point-in-time projection based on the assumption that the workload and revenue projections are realized in the current year and ongoing. This can change for various reasons, including subsequent statewide expenditure changes, unanticipated enforcement activities, lower than expected revenues, etc. The further out the projections are, the less reliable they become. As an example of how the projections can vary, in July 2022, it was estimated that the board's fund condition would have 8.2 months in reserve by the end of fiscal year 23-24. However, the board's actuals reflected 14.3 months in reserve for that fiscal year. There are also pending legislative proposals that affect this. The board is currently seeking a legislative amendment that would authorize the board to enter into stipulated settlements without transmitting the case to the Office of the Attorney General to prepare, file, and serve an accusation or statement of issues. In the past 4 years, 89% of the board's cases were settled without going to hearing. During those 4 years, the board spent an average of over $800,000 per year on OAG and Office of Administrative Hearings costs. This means that if the legislative proposal is successful, the board could potentially save over $712,000 on average per year. Several meetings were held with stakeholders. The proposed fee structure in attachment 1 was presented to representatives from CVMA and CARVTA in March. and overall the proposal was received well with no objections. However, some feedback from association representatives and other veterinarians included increasing the fees earlier and increasing the statutory cap on veterinarian fees to allow for decreasing the statutory cap for RVT fees. The rationale provided was that veterinarians' income has significantly increased over the past several years, while RVT's income has remained stagnant. As such, in attachments 4 through 6, you will see an additional fee structure, fund condition analysis, and a legislative proposal that was created to show greater impacts to veterinarians and lesser impacts to RVTs. The MDC agreed to recommend the second proposal. Specifically, this second legislative proposal would increase the initial and renewal veterinarian and and renewal university veterinarian license fees to $800 instead of the $765 fee proposed in option 1. It would decrease the RVT application, initial registration, and renewal fees to $300 instead of the $350 proposed in option 1, and decrease the VACSP application, initial permit, and renewal fees to $300 instead of the $320 proposed in option 1. The legislative proposal would raise statutory fees as follows. It would amend BPC Section 4905, new subdivision B1 and 5. The veterinarian and university veterinarian license application fees currently in 4905 subdivisions A and E would be renumbered B1 and 5 and changed from a set fee of $350 to a statutory cap of $540 to allow the board to increase the application fees and regulation over time. Section 4905, new subsection B2, the California Veterinary Medicine Practice Act course fee currently in section 4905 subdivision B would be renumbered as subdivision B2. Unnecessary text would be stricken, and the statutory cap of $100 would be increased to $155. Section 4905 would be amended to add new subdivision B3 and 6. The initial veterinarian and initial university veterinarian license fees currently in section 4905 subdivisions C and F would be renumbered as subdivision B3 and 6, and the statutory cap of $500 would be increased to $800. And then section 4905 new subdivision B4 and 7. The biennial veterinary and university license renewal fees currently in section 4905 subdivisions D and G would be renumbered as subdivision B4 and 7 and changed from a set fee of $500 to a statutory cap of $800 to allow the board to increase the renewal fees and regulation over time. The proposal would create new definitions of small, medium, and large veterinary premises for purposes of new tiered fee structures. This is 4905 new subdivision A, and it would insert new veterinary premises fees as follows. New subdivision B8 and 9. The initial and renewal veterinary premises registration fees currently set at $500 and $525 respectively in 4905 subdivisions L and M would be renumbered as subdivisions B8 and 9 and amended to provide for an initial small veterinary premises registration fee of $840 and renewal fee of $910. New subdivisions B10 and 11 would be added to establish initial and renewal medium veterinary premises registration fees in the amounts of $1,120 and $1,190 respectively in accordance with the new tiered structure. New subdivisions B12 and 13 would be added to establish initial and renewal large veterinary premises registration fees in the amounts of $1,675 and $1,745 respectively. The legislative proposal would amend the RVT and VACSP fees as follows. New subdivision B14, 15, and 16. The RVT application, initial registration, and renewal fees currently in subdivisions N, O, and P would be renumbered B14, 15, and 16 and changed from a set fee of $225 to a statutory cap of $300. And the new subdivisions B17, 18, and 19 are for the VACSP application, initial permit, and renewal fees that are currently Q, R, and S. So these would be renumbered as subdivision B17, 18, and 19 and changed from a set fee of $100 to a statutory cap of $300. The legislative proposal also includes some staff recommended cleanup language. Repealing section 4905 subdivision H and amending subdivision T, the delinquency fee. Subdivision H sets the delinquency fee for veterinarians, including university veterinarians, RVTs, and registered veterinary premises at $50. However, this fee does not align with BPC Section 163.5, which states in pertinent part the following. The delinquency penalty or late fee for any license within the Department of Consumer Affairs shall be 50% of the renewal fee for such license in effect on the date of the renewal of the license, but no less than $25 nor more than $150. Section 4905 subdivision T more closely aligns with BPC Section 163.5, but currently only applies to VACSPs. As such, this subdivision should be renumbered as subdivision B20 and amended to apply to all license, registration, and permit delinquency fees. Repeal 4905 subdivision I, duplicate license fee. Subdivision I sets a $25 fee for issuance of a duplicate license, registration, or permit. However, a licensee, registrant, or permit holder can now print these documents at any time through their Breeze account. Since no workload is associated with the task, board staff recommends repealing this section. We did have some public comment yesterday that there was difficulty finding where to print these on the Breeze account. So it was recommended that some outreach be done to inform licensees of how they can do this. Repeal BPC Section 4905 Subdivision J, the duplication or other services. This subdivision has not been used in over a decade. As such, it is recommended that this section be repealed. Notably, BPC Section 161 authorizes the board to sell copies of any part of its respective public records or compilations, extracts, or summaries of information contained in public health records at a charge that is sufficient to pay the actual costs thereof. The DCA director has determined that the fees for the sale of public records shall be 10 cents per page, plus the actual cost of the staff time for retrieving and duplicating the documents. Staff time is computed according to guidelines set by the Department of General Services State Administrative Manual at Section 8740. The fees are charged to recover the DCA's and board's costs in producing the documents. In addition, Government Code Section 7922.530 Subdivision A authorizes the board to charge fees covering direct costs of duplication of public records. Civil Code Section 1793.33 authorizes the board to charge fees not to exceed 10 cents per page for copies of records containing personal information disclosable pursuant to the Information Practices Act of 1977. Repeal 4905 Subdivision K, failing to report change of mailing address. So prior to 2019, board staff would automatically add a $25 fee to every license, registrant, and permit holder whenever a piece of mail was returned to the board, citing this subdivision. But this resulted in a significant number of phone calls from confused and upset individuals trying to renew their licenses and not understanding the additional fee. Board staff often ultimately removed the fee to appease the callers. Adding the $25 fee ended up costing the board more in staff time than the revenue it generated. As such, the board's executive officer directed staff to stop adding the fee for return mail and proposes to repeal this fee for failure to report a change of mailing address. It is important to note that removing the fee does not remove the requirement for license applicants and licensees to report changes in mailing or employment addresses. Repeal 4905 Subdivision U, application for board approval to offer RVT training. The board is already seeking a legislative proposal to repeal BPC sections related to the board approving schools or institutions offering a curriculum for training RVTs. As such, this subdivision should be repealed. Amend 4905 new subdivision V, Munson Reserve. The first sentence of this subdivision refers to a 1991 general fund loan being redeposited into the board's fund and reducing fees accordingly. It is currently unknown when the 1991 general fund loan was repaid, but there are currently no outstanding general fund loans. Thus, this sentence should be struck. The second sentence requires no less than 3 months in reserve. This provides time for the board to increase fees prior to the board going insolvent and should remain as renumbered subdivision B21 with a few minor tweaks. The third sentence sets a statutory cap of 10 months in reserve. This was recently flagged as an issue by the Joint Sunset Review Committees and raised as a logistical issue during the board's March 2025 sunset hearing. This sentence also conflicts with BPC Section 128.5 Subdivision B, which sets the board's statutory cap of 24 months in reserve. It is recommended the third sentence in the subdivision be struck, reverting to the cap in BPC Section 128.5 Subdivision B. So again, it was the second proposal that the MDC voted to move forward for board consideration today.
Now it's It's open for board discussion.
I just want to add to the public comment that we received about the challenge of being able to print out a duplicate license from the Breeze account. And I always appreciate when someone calls us out for things that we say that is challenging. So it's helpful for us to know that there might be a design issue. So thank you for that public comment yesterday. In talking to our team more last night, what I think is happening is we have probably around 5 years ago or so, there's a process for our team to publish any document that we create, so a license in this case, to the licensee, and the licensee then, once that it's clicked publish to licensee, the licensee could go on their Breeze account and print it out at any time. Though that is for the initial license process, not for renewals. And so what's happening is if you were licensed prior to this change happening, you wouldn't be able to go and print out what was just generated from the renewal, but we do have a ticket in to create that process. So it will be available for everybody in the meantime, and we can get the word out to everybody of how to do this. If we are just given, someone shoots us an email asking for the duplicate license, it's just a quick matter of us publishing what the renewal notice, the renewal certificate that was mailed, publishing it to their account, and then they can go and print it. So it's still not a time consuming thing, but it would have to be another steps. So we can address that to make it easy to do it, and we'll send out the information of how to do that. But thank you for the public comment.
Anybody else has comment on this item? None? Dr. Bradbury? No?
I do want to just thank the subcommittee. This was a lot of work, and this kind of started when I first got on the board. And thank you for doing all the work and coming up with this very well thought out and seemingly fair proposal.
I had a question. Am I on? On some of the fee increases, how was the dollar amount determined on what the fee increase should be?
So the DCA budget office told us how much revenue we would need to generate to sustain over a certain amount of time. So in the materials, you'll see the fund condition broken out, and you'll see at the bottom what the goal is that we needed to meet by a certain time. And so we took that overall dollar amount and then divided it up by the license types and the renewal types as well, and then looked at the proportional impact to that as well. And so it just came out to plugging in numbers and seeing what was the most fair across the board.
Okay, no more. Okay.
No,
Ms.
I wasn't going to
Walensky?
discuss. I was going to make a motion.
Okay, let's hear the
I was gonna
motion.
move forward. So I would like to entertain a motion, or no, I would like to make a motion. I think I gotta wake up. Make a motion to submit to the California State Legislature the legislative proposal to amend BPC Section 4905, Option 2 regarding the board's fee structure.
Second.
Okay, now so we open the floor for public comment. Any comments from the room? All right, seeing there's no public comment from the room, moderator, can you please open up the line for those that are participating remotely?
All right, we are open for public comment via WebEx on 5D as in Delta and the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from Nancy Ehrlich. Hold on just a moment, please. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Just wanted to say thank you to the board for considering the financial situation of RVTs when coming up with these new fees. I think you've done a good job and they're quite reasonable. And CARVTA supports this proposal option 2. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is our only request for public comment at the moment. Do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, please, thank you.
Ms. Pulowski,
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza,
Yes.
Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Manyak,
Yes.
Dr. Solocito,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay. All right, so we're moving on to, what are we doing? Item 5E.
Before I start on 5E, I do want to say thank you to board staff for all of their help on that last one. They spent a lot of time, a lot of hours on all of that data, and that was greatly appreciated. Agenda item 5E is the recommendation on legislative proposal to amend BPC section 4875.1 regarding complaint prioritization. The subcommittee held a consultant roundtable on February 26, 2025. They covered a variety of topics, including that consultants should not write up why a case needs to be reviewed by an expert. They should simply be placed into the expert queue. A discussion about the standard of care in anesthesia monitoring, spectrum of care and how it affects opining on standard of care, initial patient triage at veterinary clinics, consultant case reviews, as indicated in attachment 1. From November 2024 through January 2025, consultants reviewed 101 cases, of which 65 were closed by staff as no violation, 9 were closed with an educational letter, 5 had to be closed due to insufficient evidence, and 22 of those case reviews were determined to need a full expert review. Since the prior consultant roundtable, the number of cases pending consultant review increased from the previous quarter, with 920 cases pending review. This was comprised of 624 respondents. A quarterly expert roundtable was held on February 27th, 2025. There are currently 45 experts contracted with the board, 13 of which are specialists. There are currently 25 experts who actively review cases. A total of 11 experts were present during the quarterly roundtable. The board's deputy attorney general liaison, as well as several board staff, were also present. During this roundtable, a variety of topics were covered, including updates to the board's website for expert recruitment, a reminder that all written reviews should follow the sample format and be dated to match the submission date of the expert opinion, a reminder that specific regulation codes should not be used in written review, and that experts should use departure or extreme departure from the standard of care for care-related violations. Record-keeping violations should not be listed as standard of care departures since they are not care. Expert opinions should not contain words that could be viewed as biased and should be written in a just the facts manner. The difference between something not being done, which is departure from the standard of care, versus not being documented, which is a record-keeping violation when reviewing a case. Subsequent veterinarian's violations should not be included in the same expert opinion as the subject veterinarian. Analysts can open a new case against additional veterinarians if a case review for the main case reveals a potentially egregious violation. And continued discussion on standard of care related to anesthesia monitoring. A recap email was sent by board staff to all experts after the roundtable, which relayed some of the topics covered to inform those who could not attend. In addition to the recap, the DAG liaison provided guidance to assist experts with their written opinions when they suspect records may have been falsified and how to approach restitution. The data on the expert case reviews, as indicated in attachment 1 from November through February, experts reviewed 126 cases, of which 30 were closed as no violation, 26 were closed with an educational letter, 21 were cited or prepped for citation against 13 respondents, and 52 were transmitted to the Attorney General's Office for disciplinary action against 7 respondents. There are 671 cases from 458 respondents waiting for a written expert review. The subcommittee reviewed 6 finalized cases involving 2 respondents. The subcommittee identified many topics to discuss with the 2 experts who opined on the cases, including but not limited to identifying all standard of care departures, using proper terminology, refraining from using legal terms such as negligence in their analysis, knowing who will be reading the report, keeping the analysis brief for no departure opinions, reminder of the relationship between the VCPR and the physical examination, and using precise wording. These quarterly case reviews will continue, provided there are finalized cases from active experts for the subcommittee to review. The subcommittee met on March 7th to discuss the following strategic plan objectives. Objective 3.3, aimed at tracking the types of complaints submitted to the board. Opinions will be, options, will be added to the online complaint form for consumers to answer when submitting a complaint. These will include a telehealth option as a type of visit and a drop-down question on the type of animal seen. Objective 4.6 tasks the subcommittee to review and update the complaint prioritization statute, which is BPC 4875.1, to increase enforcement effectiveness. Based on current language, priorities are categorized involving veterinarians and RVTs who represent the greatest threat to the public. Therefore, veterinary medicine practiced by unlicensed individuals doesn't fall under any listed categories. The subcommittee believes that the unlicensed practice of veterinary medicine is one of the greatest threats to the public and should be included in 4875.1. Replacing the statutory language which identifies veterinarians and registered veterinary technicians with individuals will allow the board to take action against both licensed and unlicensed practitioners of veterinary medicine. As such, the subcommittee proposed to the MDC, who moved this onto the board, the following amendments for section 4875. 4875.1A, in order to ensure that its resources are maximized for the protection of the public, the board shall prioritize its investigative and prosecutional resources to ensure that veterinarians and registered veterinary technicians, individuals represented the greatest threat of harm, are identified and disciplined expeditiously. Cases involving any of the following allegations shall be handled on a priority basis as follows, with the highest priority being given to cases in paragraph 1, negligence or incompetence that involves death or serious bodily injury to an animal patient, such as a veterinarian or registered veterinary technician individual. I think I missed the stricken parts in that, sorry. Represents a danger to the public. So basically, we're striking those and adding individual. So if the board agrees with the legislative proposal recommendation, please entertain a motion to submit this to the California State Legislature. And then we did have public comment on that, actually, really quick before I forget about it. It was on spectrum of care and how it affects opining on standard of care. So there was just encouragement for this to be a topic of discussion in any roundtable discussion. CVMA did say that they would love to collaborate with the board on this as part of their 25-26 action plan.
Thank you for that. Any comments from the board? Mr. Espinosa?
So this recommendation would expand the jurisdiction of the board beyond veterinarians and registered veterinarian technicians to basically any individuals performing this work. Is that the idea?
So not necessarily expand jurisdiction. We already have jurisdiction to take action against unlicensed individuals. In a prior board meeting, the board did approve in 4875.1A1, striking the list of license types and changing it to individual, with the thought that that would then also approve or apply to unlicensed individuals in the list of categories. Because right now, the list of prioritization does not include unlicensed individuals. And so we would only, if we got a complaint against unlicensed individuals, it would fall under a lower priority. So it would under that other category. So essentially a priority of 9, even if it resulted in significant patient harm or death. And so the board, like I said, had approved the 4875.1A1 already with that assumption that it would then apply to unlicensed individuals, but didn't do the subsequent change in A where it lists out the license types. So the intent is to strike the veterinarians and RVTs, then it'll apply to all individuals. But it's not expanding authority. It's just allowing us to prioritize the unlicensed where it would fall under in that category.
So can I make a motion to submit to the California State Legislature the legislative proposal to amend BPC section 4875.1 regarding prioritization of cases?
Seconded.
I guess we're now opening the floor for public comment in the room for this proposal for agenda item 5E. Seeing nobody stepping up to make a comment in the room, moderator, can you please open up for our online participants?
Absolutely. WebEx is open on 5E as an echo and the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Plasky.
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury.
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza.
Yes.
Dr. Grant.
Yes.
Dr. Maniak.
Yes.
Dr. Solocito.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Before we proceed to agenda item 6, we will take a short break and we will be back at 2:30. Okay, we'll see you at 2:30.